The year was 1955, and Dawson, Texas carried the scent of crude oil and ambition. A gleaming black Cadillac Fleetwood roared down Main Street, its chrome accents catching the golden afternoon sun. Inside, Frank Donovan adjusted his silk tie, watching the oil derricks on the horizon through tinted windows. These mechanical giants silhouetted against the Texas sky had transformed Dawson from a speck on the map to a kingdom of black gold, his kingdom. "Pull over here, Roy," he instructed his driver, gesturing toward the Blue Diamond Saloon. The Cadillac stopped at the rear entrance. Two men in expensive suits but calloused hands emerged from the shadows. Between them, struggling with fierce dignity, was a woman. Her dark hair was disheveled, her blouse torn at the shoulder. Despite the split lip and the bruise forming under her right eye, Elena Valdez held her head high, her gaze unwavering. Donovan approached Italian leather shoes, crunching on the gravel. "Last chance, Elena. Where are Robert's documents?" His voice was sandpaper wrapped in velvet. Elena's eyes flashed. "There are no documents, Mr. Donovan. Robert never gave me anything." Donovan sighed, removing his gold cufflinks and placing them carefully in his pocket. "I built this town from nothing, Elena. Every drop of oil, every dollar that flows through Dawson, all of it exists because of me." He stepped closer. "And now you think you can destroy everything with some papers." The men tightened their grip on Elena's arms. "I want those documents, and I will have them even if I have to peel the truth from your skin." Elena stared directly into his eyes. "You killed Robert. You'll kill me too, regardless of what I say." Something dangerous flickered across Donovan's face. He nodded to the men. The first blow sent Elena to her knees. She refused to scream as they continued methodical in their brutality. When one of the men grabbed her by the hair, Elena gathered what strength remained and spat a mouthful of blood directly into Donovan's face. "You're dead," Donovan whispered, wiping the crimson streak from his cheek. The sound of a police siren wailed in the distance. Donovan checked his watch. "Finish it. Make it look like a robbery." He turned back toward his Cadillac. "And find those documents." The men dragged Elena deeper into the alley, her heels scraping across the ground. As consciousness began to fade, she heard Donovan's car pull away, taking with it her last hope of survival. The darkness welcomed her like an old friend. Sheriff Jack Sullivan hated Tuesdays. It wasn't rational, but Tuesdays had always brought him trouble. Ruth had died on a Tuesday. He'd landed at Normandy on a Tuesday. And now, as the sunset painted Dawson's sky in fiery oranges, he sat in his '50 Ford patrol car, staring at another Tuesday disaster unfolding on his radio. "Repeat that, Donna," he said into the handset, his voice steady despite the tightness in his chest. "Disturbance behind the Blue Diamond." The dispatcher's voice crackled. "Caller reported hearing a woman screaming." "Sounds serious, Jack." Sullivan sighed, setting down his cooling coffee on the dashboard. "On my way." He was about to start the engine when he caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. 42 years old, but the war had added a decade more. Gray threaded through his dark hair at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened since Ruth's passing. He adjusted his badge, tarnished at the edges, but still catching the light, and pulled away from the curb. Dawson had changed. The sleepy cattle town where he'd grown up had transformed into an oil boom town practically overnight. New money flowed like the crude they pumped from the ground. But so did new troubles. Black Ridge oil dominated everything now, from the mayor's office to the price of bread at Wilson's Market. Sullivan navigated past Crenshaw's drugstore, where teenage couples shared milkshakes under buzzing fluorescent lights. A group of roughnecks fresh off shift whistled at a passing waitress, their laughter echoing down the street. Progress, they called it. Sullivan wasn't so sure. The Blue Diamond's neon sign cast an eerie glow across the parking lot. Sullivan pulled around, back his headlights sweeping across the alley. At first, he saw nothing. Then, against the brick wall behind a stack of empty liquor crates, he spotted a crumpled form. Sullivan grabbed his flashlight and approached cautiously, one hand resting on his holstered Colt. "Police," he announced. "Anyone here?" No response came from the shadows, but as he drew closer, the beam of light revealed a woman's body. Dark hair matted with blood. The remnants of what had once been a nice dress, now torn and soiled. Sullivan knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. When he gently turned her face toward the light, he felt a jolt of recognition. Elena Valdez, secretary at Black Ridge Oil. He'd seen her around town, always impeccably dressed, always polite, but reserved. Now her olive skin was marbled with bruises, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. The beating had been professional, calculated to cause maximum pain without leaving obvious fatal injuries. "Miss Valdez," Sullivan tried pressing a handkerchief against a cut on her forehead. "Elena." Her eyelids fluttered, then opened halfway. Recognition and fear flashed in her dark eyes when she saw his badge. "No, hospital," she whispered, her voice ragged. "They'll find me there." "Who did this to you?" Sullivan asked, already guiding one arm under her shoulders to lift her. Her fingers clutched weakly at his uniform. "Please, they'll kill me," Sullivan's radio crackled. "Sheriff, you at the Blue Diamond, yet Deputy Mitchell's asking if you need backup." Something in Elena's eyes, a flash of pure terror at the deputy's name, made Sullivan hesitate. Mitchell had been getting awfully cozy with Black Ridge lately. "Negative, Donna. False alarm. Just a drunk who took a tumble. I'm handling it." He carefully lifted Elena, surprised at how light she felt despite her height. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," he said quietly. "Can you hold on?" She nodded faintly before slipping back into unconsciousness. As Sullivan carried her to his patrol car, a nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him that he was crossing a line. Whatever Elena Valdez was mixed up in it was big enough to earn her this beating, and now he was involving himself. Ruth would have told him to follow his gut. His gut told him this woman needed protection, not questions. At least not yet. The drive to his house took less than 10 minutes. Sullivan lived at the edge of town in a modest two-bedroom rancher with a covered porch and a view of the distant derricks. As he pulled into the driveway, the porch light flicked on, and his 12-year-old daughter Sarah appeared at the door. "Dad, you're home early." Her smile faltered when she saw Elena. "Who's that? Is she hurt?" "Sarah, call Dr. Thompson. Tell him it's an emergency, but he needs to come here, not the hospital." Sullivan lifted Elena from the car. "Then go next door to Mrs. Wilson's. Stay there until I come get you." "But, Dad—" "No arguments, kiddo. Just do it." Sullivan carried Elena inside, laying her on the sofa. While Sarah made the call, he gathered towels and a basin of warm water. By the time he'd cleaned the worst of the blood from Elena's face, Sarah was standing by the door with her overnight bag. "Mrs. Wilson says it's fine, but she wants to know if everything's okay." Sullivan managed a reassuring smile. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just police business I need to handle here." Sarah's eyes, so like her mother's, studied him with that uncanny perception she'd inherited from Ruth. "You're lying, but I'll go anyway." Sullivan watched through the window as his daughter crossed the yard to the neighbor's house. He couldn't involve Sarah in whatever this was. She'd already lost her mother. He wouldn't risk putting her in danger too. Turning back to Elena, he noticed her eyelids fluttering again. She was coming around. "You're safe," he said, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "You're at my house. Dr. Thompson is on his way." Elena's eyes opened fully this time, panic flooding back. She tried to sit up, but grimaced in pain. "Easy," Sullivan said. "You've got at least one broken rib, maybe more." "You don't understand," she whispered. "If they find out you helped me." "Let me worry about that." Sullivan poured a glass of water. "Can you tell me who did this to you?" Elena took a small sip, then met his gaze. "You know who." Before Sullivan could press further, he spotted something on the floor, a small purse that must have been tucked into Elena's dress. He picked it up, hesitating for only a moment before opening it. Inside was a tube of lipstick, a few dollars, and a worn photograph. Sullivan felt the air leave his lungs as he stared at the image. A young man in an army uniform stood smiling, his arm around Elena's shoulders. A face Sullivan knew better than his own, his younger brother, Robert. "How do you know my brother?" he asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. Elena's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "You're Jack," she whispered. "Robert's brother, the sheriff." A bitter laugh escaped her, turning into a wince of pain. "Of all people to find me." Sullivan was about to demand answers when a sharp knock came at the door. "Jack, it's Thompson." Sullivan tucked the photograph into his pocket and opened the door. Dr. Thompson, a balding man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, stepped inside. He'd been the town doctor for 30 years and had served as a medic in the Pacific during the war. "Good Lord," Thompson muttered when he saw Elena. "What happened here, Jack?" "Found her behind the Blue Diamond, beaten half to death." Thompson set down his bag and moved to examine Elena. "Why not take her to the hospital?" "She asked me not to. Said they would find her there." Thompson shot him a worried glance. "That's not a good sign, Jack. This isn't just a bar fight, is it?" Sullivan shook his head. "I don't think so, Doc. Can you help her here?" Thompson was already taking Elena's pulse. "I'll do what I can, but she might need more than I can provide with my bag. She conscious enough to tell you what happened?" Sullivan glanced at Elena, whose eyes were now fixed on him with a mixture of fear and something else, hope, perhaps, or desperation. "Not yet, but I intend to find out." Jack Sullivan had seen his share of the wounded. Normandy had taught him how fragile the human body could be, and Korea had reinforced the lesson. But watching Dr. Thompson tend to Elena Valdez's injuries in his living room felt different, more personal, more dangerous. "2 broken ribs," Thompson reported, hands moving methodically. "Bruised kidney, hairline fracture of the left cheekbone. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Sullivan stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. "Will she be all right?" "Given time and proper care." Thompson glanced up. "Jack, this kind of beating, it's professional. Not some drunk roughing up his girl." Sullivan nodded. "I know." Once Thompson had bandaged Elena's ribs and administered morphine for the pain, he pulled Sullivan aside. "She needs rest. The morphine will keep her under for a few hours." He lowered his voice. "Jack, what's really going on here?" Sullivan hesitated, then reached into his pocket and produced the photograph. She knew Robert. Thompson studied the image, brow furrowing. "Your brother, the one who—" "Yes, the one who supposedly shot himself 2 months ago." Thompson returned the photo, his expression grave. "Be careful, Jack. Robert worked for Black Ridge. If this woman is connected to him, and now she's been beaten half to death." "I know what it means, Doc." After Thompson left, Sullivan pulled a chair beside the sofa where Elena slept. In the soft lamplight, With the bruises partially hidden by bandages, he could see she was beautiful. Dark hair, high cheekbones that hinted at Mexican heritage, a determined set to her jaw, even in sleep. What had Robert gotten himself into? And more importantly, what had he dragged Elena into with him? Sullivan's gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, where a framed photograph of Robert in his army uniform stood beside one of Ruth. His brother had always been the idealist of the family. While Sullivan had returned from the war hardened and practical, Robert had come back with dreams of changing the world. When he'd taken the job as a geologist at Black Ridge 2 years ago, he'd been full of enthusiasm, until the last few months of his life. Sullivan's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. He tensed hand instinctively moving to his holster. Through the curtains, he recognized the silhouette of Deputy Mitchell. Sullivan opened the door just enough to step outside, closing it firmly behind him. "Evening, Deputy. Something I can help you with." Mitchell, a lean man in his 30s with sharp features and cold eyes, smiled thinly. "Just checking in, Sheriff. Heard you had some trouble at the Blue Diamond." "Nothing serious. Drunk who needed sobering up." Mitchell's gaze flicked to the house. "Funny dispatch said something about a woman screaming." Dispatch was misinformed. "That's so." Mitchell lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his skeptical expression. "Because I spoke to Roy Timmons, who works at the Blue Diamond. Says he saw you carrying someone to your car." Sullivan kept his face neutral. "Roy should stick to pouring drinks." "Maybe." Mitchell blew smoke into the night air. "Or maybe you should remember where your loyalties lie in this town, Sheriff." "My loyalty is to the law, Mitchell. Always has been." Mitchell dropped his cigarette, crushing it beneath his boot heel. "Sure it is. Just like your brother, right?" He turned to leave, then paused. "By the way, Mr. Donovan asked me to extend an invitation. Dinner at his house tomorrow night. Says there's something he wants to discuss with you." After Mitchell's patrol car disappeared down the road, Sullivan returned inside. Elena was awake, struggling to sit up. "Was that about me?" she asked, voice strained. Sullivan helped her into a sitting position. "Deputy Mitchell seems to think I'm hiding something." "You are," she said. "B, why don't we start with how you know my brother?" Elena's gaze dropped to her hands. "Robert was my friend. We worked together at Black Ridge." "Friends," Sullivan repeated, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "That's why you carry his picture." A flash of defiance crossed her face. "We were close, yes. Robert was different from the others. He saw me as a person, not just—" she gestured vaguely. "Not just a Mexican. Not just a woman. Not just a secretary." Elena's voice gained strength. "Your brother was a good man, Sheriff Sullivan. He discovered something at Black Ridge, something that got him killed." Sullivan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The official report had ruled Robert's death a suicide. Single gunshot to the head in his apartment. No note. Sullivan had never believed it. Robert wasn't the type, but he'd had no evidence to suggest otherwise. "You're saying my brother was murdered." "I'm saying Robert Sullivan didn't kill himself." Her dark eyes held his. "And the same people who killed him will kill me if they find me." Sullivan poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon from a bottle on the sideboard. "What exactly did Robert discover?" "Black Ridge has been using illegal chemicals in their wells, chemicals that increase oil production but contaminate the groundwater. Robert found evidence linking these chemicals to a cluster of cancer cases and birth defects in Mexico Town." Mexico Town was what locals called the poor section of Dawson, where most of the Hispanic oil workers lived. Separated from the main town by railroad tracks, It was a collection of ramshackle houses and trailers where entire families crammed into spaces meant for half their number. And he told you this. He showed me the evidence. Chemical analyses, geological surveys, medical reports. Robert was building a case against Black Ridge. Elena winced as she shifted position. 2 days before he died, he gave me something for safekeeping. Said if anything happened to him, I should find you. Sullivan drained his glass. Why me? We barely spoke in the last year. He said despite everything, you were the only person he trusted to do the right thing. Elena's expression softened. He spoke of you often, Sheriff. Said you were the most honest man he knew, even if you were too stubborn to admit when you were wrong. That sounded like Robert, always believing the best of people even when they disappointed him. These documents, Sullivan said. Where are they now? Somewhere safe. Donovan knows you have them. That's why you were beaten. Elena nodded slightly. He thinks I'll talk if he hurts me enough, or that I'll lead him to the documents. Will you? Her eyes flashed. I watched your brother die for this Sheriff Sullivan. I won't dishonor that sacrifice. Sullivan studied her. Either she was telling the truth, or she was the most convincing liar he'd ever met. Robert had always been a good judge of character. If he trusted this woman, you need to rest, Sullivan said finally. We'll figure this out tomorrow. Sheriff, Elena called as he turned to leave. They're watching your house now. I've put you in danger. Sullivan paused at the doorway. Wouldn't be the first time, Miss Valdez. He switched off the light and moved to the kitchen, where he poured another bourbon and sat in darkness, looking out at the oil derricks blinking on the horizon. Robert had always been the idealistic one, the one who believed in justice and doing the right thing. Sullivan had lost that faith somewhere in the mud of France or the frozen hills of Korea. Tomorrow, he'd have to make a choice, help Elena Valdez and honor his brother's memory, or walk away and preserve what little peace he'd managed to carve out in Dawson. Sullivan nursed his drink until dawn broke over the Texas landscape, painting the oil derricks in shades of gold and blood. By morning, Elena had recovered enough to sit at Sullivan's kitchen table. Despite the bruises mottling her face and the careful way she held herself to avoid aggravating her ribs, she possessed a quiet dignity that impressed him. Coffee, he offered, setting a mug before her. Thank you. She wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic. Your daughter, is she safe? Sullivan nodded, surprised by her concern. Neighbors watching her. Sarah knows not to ask too many questions. She must take after her mother, Elena said with a small smile. Sullivan busied himself with the percolator. Ruth wasn't one for staying quiet when something bothered her. Robert mentioned she passed. I'm sorry. Cancer. 3 years ago. Sullivan joined her at the table. Let's talk about these documents. Elena sipped her coffee, wincing slightly at its strength. Robert discovered Black Ridge was using a chemical compound in their drilling process, something called MEC-40. It increases oil flow from difficult wells, but it's highly toxic and banned in most states. And it's contaminating the water supply, especially in Mexico Town. The groundwater there flows directly beneath well number 7 Black Ridge's most productive site. Robert took water samples, had them analyzed at the university lab in Austin. The results were devastating. And the documents, shipping manifests proving Black Ridge imported the chemicals, lab reports on the water, medical records Robert collected from families in Mexico Town. Elena met his gaze. Everything needed to shut down Black Ridge and send Frank Donovan to prison. Sullivan leaned back, considering. If what you're saying is true, why not take this to the state police or the newspapers? Robert tried, The state inspector is on Donovan's payroll, the newspaper editor too. Donovan owns this town sheriff. Anyone who crosses him disappears or has an accident. Her voice cracked slightly, like Robert. The telephone rang, startling them both. Sullivan answered warily. Sullivan, Jack, it's Thompson. You need to turn on your radio, now. Sullivan flicked on the kitchen radio as Elena watched with growing apprehension. After a moment of static, an announcer's voice filled the room. Repeating our top story, police are seeking information regarding the murder of Dawson National Bank President Harold Jones, found dead in his office this morning. According to Deputy Sheriff Mitchell, authorities are looking for Elena Valdez, a Mexican national employed at Black Ridge Oil, in connection with the crime. Valdez is described as approximately 30 years old, 5'6", with dark hair and eyes. She is considered dangerous and may be armed. Anyone with information is asked to contact the sheriff's office immediately. Sullivan switched off the radio, meeting Elena's horrified gaze. Harold Jones, she whispered. The banker Robert trusted. What does that mean? It means they're eliminating everyone connected to the documents. Elena's hands trembled around her mug. And framing me for it. Sullivan paced the kitchen. I need to go into town, find out what's happening. If you leave me here, I'm as good as dead. I can't take you with me. Sullivan ran a hand through his hair. And I can't send you with Sarah. There must be someone you trust. Sullivan considered his options. Maybe, but it's risky. He retrieved his service revolver from the gun cabinet, checking it methodically before holstering it. Then he removed a second weapon, a well-maintained M1911A1 from his Army days. Can you use this? Elena took the pistol with practiced ease. My father taught me, before the fever took him. Sullivan nodded, oddly reassured. I'll be back as soon as I can. Keep the doors locked. Anyone but me tries to enter, you use that. As Sullivan stepped onto his porch, the morning sun glinted off something metallic in the brush near his driveway. Instinct made him drop to one knee just as a rifle crack split the air. The bullet splintered the door frame where his head had been moments before. Sullivan drew his revolver, scanning the landscape. Another shot kicked up dirt near his feet. The shooter was in the scrubland east of the house elevated position, using the morning sun as cover. Professional work. Keeping low, Sullivan sprinted for his patrol car, using it as a shield. 2 more shots, one punching through the windshield. He fired back 3 rounds toward the shooter's position. The shooting stopped. Sullivan slid into the driver's seat, through the passenger side, gunning the engine and reversing rapidly down the driveway. In his rearview mirror, he glimpsed a figure retreating into the brush, too far to identify. But the message was clear. They weren't just after Elena anymore. Now Sullivan was a target too. As he sped toward town, Sullivan's mind raced. Harold Jones murdered. Elena framed. A professional gunman taking shots at a sheriff. Whatever Robert had uncovered was bigger than contaminated water in Mexico town. Much bigger. The Dawson he drove through now seemed different, hostile territory where any window might conceal a gunman, any friendly face might belong to one of Donovan's informants. The oil derricks loomed on the horizon like skeletal sentinels watching his every move. Sullivan pulled up to the sheriff's office, mentally preparing for whatever awaited him inside. As he stepped from the car, he noticed a smear of red on his uniform sleeve, blood from a graze he hadn't even felt in the heat of the moment. Deputy Mitchell emerged from the building, eyes widening at the sight of the bullet-riddled patrol car. Jesus, Sheriff, what happened to you? Sullivan brushed past him. Someone took a shot at me. 4, actually. Mitchell followed him inside. At your house, where's the Mexican woman Sullivan? Sullivan turned slowly. What Mexican woman would that be, deputy? Don't play dumb. Elena Valdez. Half the town saw you carrying her to your car last night. Mitchell's hand hovered near his holster. She's wanted for questioning in Harold Jones's murder. Based on what evidence? Her fingerprints are all over his office, and we found this. Mitchell tossed an evidence bag onto the desk. Inside was a woman's scarf, blood-stained. Belongs to Valdez. Jones bled out all over it when she cut his throat. Sullivan picked up the bag. The scarf was silk, expensive-looking. And you think a woman who just slashed someone's throat would leave her bloody scarf at the scene? Criminals make mistakes. Not that kind. Sullivan dropped the bag. This is a setup, and you know it. Mitchell's expression hardened. What I know is you're harboring a murder suspect. That makes you an accessory badge or no badge. I'm still sheriff here, Mitchell. For now. Mitchell moved closer. Donovan wants to see you. Says he has a proposition that might help your situation. Sullivan met the deputy's gaze. Tell Donovan if he wants to talk, he can come to my office like any other citizen. Mitchell laughed. You really don't get it, do you? This isn't your town anymore, Sullivan. It's his. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. By the way, we've got roadblocks on every road out of Dawson. So wherever you've stashed your Mexican girlfriend, she's not going anywhere. After Mitchell left, Sullivan sank into his chair, mind racing. His position as sheriff was tenuous at best now. If Donovan controlled the mayor and the town council, which he almost certainly did, Sullivan could be removed by sundown. He needed to move Elena somewhere safer. And he needed allies, people who weren't under Donovan's thumb. But in a town like Dawson, those were in short supply. Sullivan picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. Eddie, it's Sullivan. I need a favor. Eddie Reynolds had been a war correspondent before settling in Dawson to run the local newspaper. Though the paper was largely controlled by Donovan's advertising dollars, Eddie maintained connections with bigger publications in Dallas and Houston. Meet me at Thompson's place in an hour, Sullivan said, and Eddie makes sure you're not followed. After hanging up, Sullivan checked his watch. He had time for one more stop before returning home. He needed answers, and there was only one place to start looking for them. Robert's apartment had been sealed since his death. As Sullivan unlocked the door, the musty smell of an unoccupied space greeted him. Everything remained as it had been the night Robert died. Books on the shelves, papers on the desk, dishes in the sink. The official report stated Robert had shot himself while sitting at his desk. The bullet had gone through his right temple and embedded in the wall. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Sullivan examined the desk. Robert had been left-handed like their father. The angle of the bullet from right to left had bothered Sullivan from the start, but without evidence of foul play, he'd been forced to accept the suicide ruling. He began searching methodically, looking for anything that might connect to Elena's story. The desk drawers yielded nothing unusual. The bookshelf contained geology texts and a few dog-eared novels. Under the bed, Sullivan found a locked metal box. Using his pocket knife, he forced the lock. Inside were personal items, photographs, letters, a few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to their mother. At the bottom, Sullivan found a small notebook bound in leather. The pages were filled with Robert's precise handwriting coordinates, numbers, chemical formulas. Many entries were dated, stretching back 6 months. Sullivan couldn't understand the technical details, but he recognized the pattern of someone building a case, methodically gathering evidence. The final entry, dated 2 days before Robert's death, read only, "Told E about the music box. If anything happens, she knows what to do. Music box. Sullivan frowned, trying to remember if Robert had owned such a thing. As a child, Robert had kept a collection of records, jazz, mostly a passion he'd developed during the war. Sullivan pocketed the notebook and continued searching. In the closet, behind a stack of shirts, he found a cardboard box filled with vinyl records in paper sleeves. Flipping through them, Sullivan recognized names from Robert's collection: Ellington Parker Goodman. One record stood out, a Duke Ellington album still in its original packaging, seemingly unplayed. When Sullivan slid the vinyl from its sleeve, something fluttered to the floor. A photograph. It showed Frank Donovan standing beside a large tanker truck. Scrawled on the back in Robert's handwriting, MECT 40 Delivery Well 7, June 1955. Sullivan was reaching for the photograph when he heard a floorboard creak behind him. He spun, drawing his revolver, but not fast enough. The blow caught him on the side of the head, sending him crashing into the record player. As consciousness faded, Sullivan glimpsed a familiar face looming over him. "Sorry, Sheriff," Deputy Mitchell said, reaching for the photograph. "Can't have you finding that." The last thing Sullivan saw before darkness claimed him was Mitchell tucking the Ellington record under his arm. Cold water shocked Sullivan back to consciousness. He gasped, blinking away the darkness to find himself still in Robert's apartment, slumped against the wall. His head throbbed where Mitchell had struck him, and his service revolver was gone. "Thought I'd lost you there for a minute, Sheriff." Mitchell stood over him, empty water glass in hand. Behind him, two men Sullivan didn't recognize searched through Robert's belongings, methodically emptying drawers and removing books from shelves. Sullivan tested his jaw, relieved to find it unbroken. "Since when does the Dawson County Sheriff's Department conduct searches without warrants?" "Deputy." Mitchell's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't department business. Call it a private contract." He gestured toward the men. "Mr. Donovan's associates are very thorough." "I can see that." Sullivan tried to stand, but Mitchell's boot pressed against his chest. "Not so fast. We've got some talking to do first." Mitchell knelt beside him. "Where's the woman?" "What woman?" The backhand came fast, splitting Sullivan's lip. "Don't play dumb, Jack. Elena Valdez. The Mexican who's got you risking your career, maybe your life, for whatever sob story she fed you." Sullivan spat blood onto the floor. "If I knew where she was, I wouldn't tell you." Mitchell sighed, standing again. "We've been watching your house. She's not there now. So where'd you stash her?" When Sullivan remained silent, Mitchell nodded to one of the men who stepped forward and delivered a precise kick to Sullivan's ribs. Pain exploded through his chest. "Your brother was stubborn too," Mitchell said conversationally. "Right up until the end." Sullivan looked up sharply. "You killed Robert." "Let's just say I facilitated his suicide." Mitchell checked his watch. "Donovan's waiting. Bring him." The men hauled Sullivan to his feet, binding his wrists with duct tape. As they dragged him toward the door, Sullivan's mind raced. If they were taking him to Donovan, they must not have found Elena yet. There was still time, but time for what his position as sheriff meant nothing if Donovan controlled the law in Dawson. He needed leverage. "I know about the chemicals," Sullivan said, stopping Mitchell at the door. "MECT 40. The contaminated wells in Mexico town." Something flickered across Mitchell's face. Surprise, maybe even concern. "What exactly do you think you know?" "Enough to understand why you killed my brother. Enough to bury Donovan and Black Ridge." Sullivan leaned closer. "Enough to make sure you hang alongside him when this is over." Mitchell studied him for a long moment, then laughed. "Big talk for a man in your position." He pushed Sullivan toward the stairs. "Let's see if you're still feeling brave after you've had a chat with Donovan." They led Sullivan to an unmarked black sedan parked in the alley behind Robert's apartment building. One of Donovan's men sat behind the wheel, while the other forced Sullivan into the back seat. Mitchell took the passenger seat, positioning the rear-view mirror to keep an eye on their captive. As they drove through Dawson, Sullivan cataloged landmarks, gauging their direction. Not toward the Black Ridge offices downtown, but heading east toward Donovan's estate on the outskirts of town. Sullivan had never visited the estate, but everyone in Dawson knew about it. 10 acres of manicured grounds surrounding a Spanish-style mansion built with the first wave of oil money. Rumor had it Donovan had imported Italian marble for the floors and hired a French landscape architect for the gardens. The sedan passed through ornate iron gates and proceeded up a long driveway lined with oak trees. Sullivan noted security measures as they approached armed guards at the gate, surveillance cameras disguised as lanterns, a clear view of all approaching vehicles from the main house. They parked in a circular drive before the mansion's entrance. Sullivan was hauled from the car and marched inside through a grand foyer with the rumored marble floors into what appeared to be a study. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and the smell of expensive cigars greeted them. Frank Donovan sat behind an enormous desk, reading glasses perched on his aquiline nose as he reviewed documents. He looked up as they entered, removing his glasses with practiced elegance. "Sheriff Sullivan, how kind of you to join me." He gestured to Mitchell. "Remove those restraints. The sheriff is our guest, not a prisoner." Mitchell hesitated before cutting the duct tape binding Sullivan's wrists. Sullivan massaged the circulation back into his hands, assessing his options. The study had 2 doors and a large window overlooking the garden. 3 men between him and potential escape routes. No visible weapons except for Mitchell's sidearm. "Please sit." Donovan indicated a leather chair across from the desk. When Sullivan remained standing, Donovan sighed. "As you wish. Mitchell, wait outside. I'd like to speak with the sheriff privately." "Sir, I don't think." "That will be all, Deputy." After Mitchell and the others left, Donovan opened a humidor on his desk and offered Sullivan a cigar. "Cuban. Illegal, but then certain rules don't apply to men like us. We're nothing alike, Donovan." "No." Donovan lit his own cigar. 2 war veterans who've seen the worst of humanity. 2 men who've built something from nothing in this Dust Bowl town. I'd say we have more in common than you'd care to admit. I don't murder people who get in my way." Donovan exhaled a perfect ring of smoke. "Straight to the point. I've always appreciated that about you, Sullivan." He leaned forward. "Let's be frank. Your brother was sticking his nose where it didn't belong. He left me no choice." The casual admission of murder sent ice through Sullivan's veins, but he kept his expression neutral. "And now you've left me no choice. On the contrary, I'm offering you several choices." Donovan stood, moving to a sidebar where he poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "Join me in a drink, Macallan 25-year. Another illegal indulgence." When Sullivan didn't respond, Donovan continued undeterred. "Your first choice. Walk away. Resign as sheriff. Take your daughter and leave Dawson. I'll provide generous severance, enough to start fresh anywhere you like." "And Elena Valdez?" Donovan's smile tightened. "That's not your concern. You'll kill her. Miss Valdez has made her choices just as your brother did." Donovan sipped his whiskey. "Your second choice, keep your position. Continue as sheriff with certain understandings about jurisdiction and discretion. Black Ridge is expanding, Sheriff. We're bringing prosperity to this backward corner of Texas. Progress requires flexibility." "Flexibility," Sullivan repeated. "Like poisoning the water in Mexico town." Donovan waved dismissively. Regrettable but necessary collateral damage. Progress has its costs. And what's my third choice? Donovan's eyes hardened. Join your brother. Sullivan held his gaze. You've miscalculated, Donovan. I already know about MECT-40. I have Robert's evidence. Bluffing doesn't suit you. Donovan returned to his desk. Mitchell searched your home while you were unconscious. We found nothing. Because it's not there. This at least wasn't a lie. Release me. Leave Elena alone. And maybe that evidence stays buried. Donovan studied him for a long moment. You know what impressed me most about you during our time in Normandy, Sullivan? Your unflinching honesty. You were incapable of deception. He pressed a button on his desk. Which is why I know you're lying now. The door opened and Mitchell returned accompanied by the two men from before, and a third figure that made Sullivan's blood run cold. Sarah. His 12-year-old daughter stood trembling between the men, her blue eyes wide with fear. When she saw Sullivan, she tried to run to him, but one of the men caught her arm. Dad! Sullivan lunged forward only to be restrained by Mitchell. You bastard! He growled at Donovan. She's a child. She's leverage. Donovan's voice was ice. Now let's discuss the evidence again. And this time, Sheriff, I suggest honesty. Sullivan looked at Sarah, saw the terror in her eyes, and felt something break inside him. Let her go, please. She has nothing to do with this. That depends entirely on you. Donovan nodded to one of his men. Take Miss Sullivan to the guest room upstairs. Make her comfortable, but keep her secure. As they led Sarah away, she looked back over her shoulder. Dad? It's going to be all right, sweetheart, Sullivan called after her, hoping his voice sounded more confident than he felt. I'll be right here. When the door closed behind her, Sullivan turned to Donovan, cold rage replacing fear. If you harm one hair on her head, that's entirely up to you. Donovan returned to his seat. Now, shall we begin again? Where is Elena Valdez, and where is my property? Sullivan weighed his options. With Sarah in danger, he couldn't risk defiance. But surrendering Elena meant signing her death warrant and betraying Robert's memory. I need assurances, Sullivan said finally. My daughter walks free unharmed, Elena too. Donovan laughed. You're not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you if you want your property back. Mitchell stepped forward. Let me persuade him, Mr. Donovan. 5 minutes alone. Patience, Mitchell. Donovan studied Sullivan. You have until sunset to produce Miss Valdez and all copies of the documents. After that, I make no promises about your daughter's safety. Sullivan felt bile rise in his throat. How do I know you'll keep your word? You don't, but it's the only chance Sarah has. Donovan nodded to Mitchell's. Return the sheriff's weapon and escort him off the property. We'll be watching your every move. Outside, as Mitchell handed back Sullivan's revolver, he leaned in close. For what it's worth, I never wanted the kid involved. That wasn't part of the deal. Sullivan checked the cylinder empty as expected. There's still time to do the right thing, Mitchell. The right thing, Mitchell shook his head. In this town, that's whatever Donovan says it is. As Sullivan walked toward the gate, Mitchell called after him. Sunset Sheriff. Not a minute later. Sullivan hadn't expected to find his patrol car waiting, but there it was parked outside Donovan's gate. A message they were confident he'd return with Elena, or they wouldn't have provided transportation. He checked his watch. 4 hours until sunset. 4 hours to save Sarah and Elena. The drive back to town gave Sullivan time to think. Donovan's confidence suggested he believed Sullivan would sacrifice Elena to save Sarah, a rational calculation. What kind of father would choose a stranger over his own daughter? But Sullivan couldn't shake the image of Robert, couldn't forget his brother's final attempt to expose the truth, couldn't forget the children in Mexico Town drinking poisoned water, while Black Ridge counted profits. He drove not to his house, but to Dr. Thompson's modest bungalow on the west side of town. The doctor answered the door immediately, expression grave. "Jack, I was beginning to worry. Is she safe?" Thompson nodded, leading him inside. The living room had been converted into a makeshift examination room. Elena lay on a hospital cot, bandages, fresh and IV in her arm. Her eyes opened when Sullivan entered. "Sheriff, you're hurt." Sullivan touched the dried blood at his temple. "It's nothing. How are you feeling?" "Better, thanks to the doctor." She struggled to sit up. "Did you find anything at Robert's apartment?" "Mitchell found me instead." Sullivan turned to Thompson. "They have Sarah." The doctor's face paled. "My God, Jack." "Donovan wants Elena and the documents by sunset, or—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Elena's expression hardened. "Then you must give him what he wants. It's not that simple." Sullivan paced the room. "Donovan will kill you. And once he has the documents, what's to stop him from killing Sarah too? Or all of us?" "He's right," Thompson said. "Donovan can't afford witnesses now." Sullivan stopped pacing, a thought occurring to him. "Where's Eddie? He was supposed to meet us here." "He called. Said he'd be late, something about a lead he needed to follow." Sullivan checked his ammunition. He kept spare rounds in his jacket pocket. "I need to get Sarah out first. Then we deal with Donovan." Elena watched him load his revolver. "You'll never get past his security alone." "I don't plan to be alone." Sullivan looked to Thompson. "Doc, I need you to get Elena somewhere safe. There's a hunting cabin in the pine grove out by Miller's Creek. My family used it when I was a kid." "I know it," Thompson nodded. "But Jack, what are you planning?" "Something stupid." Sullivan turned to Elena. "The music box Robert mentioned, was it really a record?" "The Ellington album." Elena's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I found it, but Mitchell took it." "Where are the other documents?" "Hidden, in Mexico Town." Elena hesitated. "My brother Miguel has them. He's the foreman at well number 7. Another piece clicked into place. The Mexican workers would have noticed the chemicals, would have been the first to suspect when their families got sick. "Can you trust him with my life?" Elena reached for Sullivan's hand. "Sheriff Jack, you can't face Donovan alone. He has too many men, too much power." Sullivan squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not facing him alone. I'm going to Mexico Town first." Mexico Town existed in stark contrast to Dawson proper. Where the main town boasted paved streets and modern storefronts, Mexico Town consisted of dirt roads and makeshift housing. Children played in dusty yards while women hung laundry on lines strung between dwellings. Men in oil-stained work clothes gathered in small groups speaking rapidly in Spanish. Sullivan's patrol car drew immediate attention as he drove down the main road. Conversations stopped. Children were ushered inside. Suspicious eyes tracked his progress. He parked outside a small cantina, little more than a shack with a hand-painted sign. Inside, a few patrons sat at mismatched tables nursing beers despite the early hour. A radio played Mexican music from a shelf behind the bar. The bartender, a heavy-set man with a magnificent mustache, eyed Sullivan warily. "¿Qué quieres, Sheriff?" "I'm looking for Miguel Hernandez." The cantina fell silent. The bartender's expression remained neutral, but his hand moved below the counter, reaching for a weapon, Sullivan guessed. "No hay nadie con ese nombre aquí." "Tell him Elena sent me," Sullivan said. Tell him it's about Robert Sullivan." The bartender exchanged glances with a young man near the door who nodded and slipped outside. Sullivan waited, aware of the hostility surrounding him. These people had reason to distrust the law, especially a sheriff who'd turned a blind eye to their suffering. 10 minutes later, the young man returned, whispering to the bartender, who jerked his head toward a back door. "Por ahí." Sullivan followed the young man through the door and into an alleyway. They walked in silence past ramshackle dwellings until they reached a small house at the edge of Mexico town. Unlike its neighbors, this one was well maintained, with a small garden of desert plants and a freshly painted door. The young man knocked, and the door opened to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered Mexican in his 30s. He wore clean work clothes, and his dark eyes, so like Elena's, assessed Sullivan coldly. "Sheriff Sullivan, I never thought I'd welcome you into my home." His English was perfect, with just a hint of an accent. "Come in." The interior was modest, but immaculate. Family photographs lined the walls, and books filled a small shelf in the corner. A woman worked in the kitchen, glancing nervously at Sullivan before retreating to another room. "My wife Lucia," Miguel explained. "She's not comfortable around police." "Can't blame her." Sullivan removed his hat. "Your sister sent me." Miguel's expression softened slightly. "Elena is alive when she didn't come home last night. She's safe, for now." Sullivan held the man's gaze. "But she won't be for long unless we act quickly." Miguel gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me everything." Sullivan explained the situation. Elena's beating, his discovery of her connection to Robert Mitchell's attack, Donovan's ultimatum, and Sarah's abduction. Throughout, Miguel listened impassively, his only reaction a tightening of his jaw when Sullivan described Elena's injuries. "So now Donovan has your daughter, and he wants my sister in exchange." Miguel's voice was measured, controlled. "Along with the evidence that would destroy him." "Yes." "Why come to me? Why not simply deliver Elena as ordered?" Sullivan leaned forward. "Because Donovan will kill her either way. And maybe Sarah, too. I need leverage, something that forces him to keep his word." "And you think I can provide this leverage?" Miguel's laugh was bitter. "Look around you, Sheriff. What power do we have against a man like Donovan? You have numbers, and you have this." Sullivan tapped his temple. "Knowledge of the wells, of Black Ridge's operations. Elena said you're the foreman at well number 7. See, for 3 years. Then you've seen the chemicals, MECT-40. Miguel's eyes narrowed. "The drums with the skull markings. They told us it was just additives to improve flow." He stood, moving to a cabinet in the corner of the room. 2 months ago, when children in Mexico town began getting sick, Robert came to me, asked questions about the chemicals, about the water. He unlocked the cabinet and removed a metal box. Before he died, he gave me these. Said if anything happened to him, I should protect them and Elena. Inside the box were folders containing laboratory reports, shipping manifests, medical records, and photographs, including duplicates of the one Sullivan had found in Robert's apartment. "This is what Donovan wants," Miguel said. "Proof that he's been poisoning our people for profit." Sullivan examined the documents. "Why haven't you taken these to the authorities?" Miguel's expression hardened. "What authorities? The sheriff who ignored our complaints, the state inspector who drinks with Donovan, the newspaper that refuses to print our stories." The accusation stung because it held truth. Sullivan had heard rumors about problems in Mexico town, but had dismissed them as exaggeration. "I failed your people," Sullivan admitted. "I failed my brother, too. But I'm trying to make it right." Miguel studied him for a long moment. "What exactly are you proposing, Sheriff?" "I need men. men willing to stand against Donovan. To do what storm his mansion, you'd be shot before you reached the front door. Not his mansion, the refinery. Sullivan leaned forward. That's where his real vulnerability lies. The equipment, the well's his money. We take control of the refinery, we have something to bargain with. Miguel shook his head. Impossible. It's guarded. Not at shift change, and not if the foreman calls an emergency meeting of all workers. Understanding dawned in Miguel's eyes. You're talking about a strike. I'm talking about justice. Sullivan stood. Your people are dying from Donovan's poison. My daughter's in danger. Your sister, too. We have a common enemy. And after, if we succeed, Miguel's gaze was penetrating. Will you remember this alliance when it's convenient to forget? Sullivan held out his hand. You have my word. Whatever happens, Mexico Town gets justice. After a moment's hesitation, Miguel clasped Sullivan's hand. I will speak to my men, but I make no promises, Sheriff. Fair enough. Sullivan checked his watch. 2 hours until sunset. There's one more person we need to see. Apenas. Eddie Reynolds' office at the Dawson Daily Chronicle was cluttered with papers, typewriters, and the perpetual haze of cigarette smoke. The newspaper editor, a wiry man in his 50s with perpetually ink-stained fingers, was on the telephone when Sullivan and Miguel arrived. I don't care what Donovan's office told you, Charlie. Run the story. He glanced up, seeing Sullivan. Gotta go. Visitors. He hung up, eyeing Miguel suspiciously. Sheriff, what's with the, company? Eddie, this is Miguel Hernandez, Elena's brother. Recognition flashed across Eddie's face. The foreman from Mexico Town. Robert mentioned you. Miguel nodded stiffly. Sullivan closed the office door. Eddie, we need your help. It's about Robert's investigation. Eddie's demeanor changed instantly. You know about that. Robert was working on something big, told me he had proof Black Ridge was dumping chemicals. Then he turns up dead. And suddenly, the paper's getting pressure to drop any stories about water quality. We have the proof. Sullivan nodded to Miguel, who placed the metal box on Eddie's desk. Everything Robert collected. Eddie whistled as he flipped through the documents. This is dynamite, Jack. Pure dynamite. Donovan would kill to keep this quiet. He already has. And now he's got my daughter. Eddie's head snapped up. Sarah Jesus Jack. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. What can I do? 2 things. First, get this story ready to run. Everything. The chemicals, the cover-up, Robert's murder. Donovan owns the Chronicle, Jack. He'll shut us down before the ink dries. Not if you send copies to every major paper in Texas first. Houston Chronicle, Dallas Morning News, San Antonio Express. Eddie nodded slowly. I still have contacts. Could work. Second thing, we need a camera. Tonight. Eddie opened his desk drawer and removed a Leica. What exactly are you planning? Sullivan outlined his strategy. Miguel's workers taking control of the refinery, documenting the chemical drums, creating leverage to force Donovan's hand. That's insane, Eddie said when he finished. You're talking about essentially holding the refinery hostage. I'm talking about giving Donovan a choice release, Sarah, and face justice or lose everything. Eddie glanced at Miguel. And you're on board with this? My people are dying, Mr. Reynolds. Our children drink poison while Donovan grows rich. Miguel's voice was steel. I am beyond on board. Eddie sighed, handing over the camera. I always knew working in a small town would get me killed someday. As they prepared to leave, the office door burst open. Deputy Mitchell stood in the doorway and service revolver drawn. "Well, well," he said, aiming at Sullivan. "Looks like I've found myself a conspiracy." Sullivan reached for his weapon, but Mitchell shook his head. "Wouldn't try that, Sheriff. Not unless you want to explain to your daughter why you never came back." "Mitchell," Sullivan kept his voice level, "think about what you're doing. Donovan is poisoning an entire community. Children are dying. Spare me the sermon." Mitchell's gaze flicked to the metal box on Eddie's desk. "That what I think it is. Robert's evidence," Sullivan confirmed. "Enough to send Donovan to prison for the rest of his life." "And you," Miguel added, "as his accomplice." Something shifted in Mitchell's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. "I never signed up for poisoning kids." "But you signed up to kill my brother," Sullivan said. "What did Donovan offer you?" "Money, power." Mitchell's gun hand wavered slightly. "You don't understand. Donovan owns this town. Cross him and you're finished." "He's just a man. Men can fall." For a long moment, the office was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Then slowly Mitchell lowered his weapon. "Sarah's at the refinery," he said quietly. "Not the mansion. Donovan moved her an hour ago. She's in the administration building, second floor." Sullivan exchanged glances with Miguel. "Why tell us this?" Mitchell holstered his revolver. "Because your brother was right. And because I'm not a monster." He turned to leave, then paused. "There are 6 guards at the refinery. Twice that at shift change in 1 hour. Donovan will be there too." "Mitchell," Sullivan called. "Why now? Why switch sides?" The deputy's laugh was hollow. "Who says I'm switching sides? Maybe I'm just tired of being on the wrong one." After Mitchell left, the 3 men stood in stunned silence. "Can we trust him?" Eddie finally asked. "No," Sullivan said, "but we don't have a choice. If Sarah's at the refinery, that's where we need to be." Miguel nodded grimly. "I'll gather my men. 20 minutes." As Miguel departed, Eddie placed a hand on Sullivan's shoulder. "Jack, what's the end game here? Say you get Sarah back then. What Donovan still runs this town?" Sullivan checked his revolver, making sure each chamber was loaded. "Not after tonight." Eddie studied his friend. "You're going to kill him." "I'm going to stop him." Sullivan headed for the door. "Whatever it takes." Outside, Sullivan squinted against the setting sun. The golden light bathed Dawson's main street, casting long shadows from the storefronts. In the distance, the oil derricks loomed like dark sentinels against the reddening sky. Somewhere in that direction, Sarah waited. His daughter. His responsibility. Everything else, Elena Roberts' evidence, the people of Mexico Town, all of it mattered. But nothing more than Sarah. As Sullivan walked toward his patrol car, a movement across the street caught his eye. A black sedan idled by the hardware store, 2 men watching him from inside. Donovan's men tracking his every move. Sullivan climbed into his car, aware that he was being followed, aware that he might be driving into a trap. But for the first time since this began, he had a plan. A terrible, desperate plan, but a plan nonetheless. The road to the refinery stretched before him, straight and unforgiving. With each mile, Sullivan felt the weight of what awaited him. Not just Donovan and his men, but the choice he'd have to make. Justice for Robert and the people of Mexico Town, or safety for Sarah. In the war, they'd called moments like these a no-win scenario. You made the best choice you could and lived with the consequences. Sullivan checked his rearview mirror. The black sedan maintained its distance, following, but not approaching. They were escorting him to his reckoning. As the refinery came into view, a sprawling complex of tanks, pipes, and towers silhouetted against the sunset, Sullivan made his choice. Tonight, someone would pay for Robert's death. Tonight, the poisoning would end. Whether Sullivan would live to see the morning was another matter entirely. The Black Ridge refinery dominated the eastern edge of Dawson, a sprawling kingdom of steel and fire. Even from half a mile away, Sullivan could smell the distinctive petroleum scent and hear the constant mechanical heartbeat of pumps and machinery. He parked his patrol car behind an abandoned equipment shed a quarter-mile from the main gate. No sense advertising his arrival just yet. The black sedan that had been following him continued toward the refinery, presumably to report his approach to Donovan. Sullivan checked his watch. 30 minutes until the 7 o'clock shift change, when Miguel and his men would make their move. 30 minutes to locate Sarah and figure out how to get her safely away from Donovan. The refinery complex sprawled across nearly 40 acres, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Floodlights illuminated the grounds while the central processing towers belched flames into the darkening sky. The administration building Mitchell had mentioned sat near the main entrance, a 2-story brick structure with windows overlooking the facility. Sullivan studied the perimeter through his binoculars. 2 guards at the main gate, another patrolling the fence line. Inside, workers moved between buildings, finishing their shifts. He spotted the black sedan pulling up to the administration building, its occupants hurrying inside. Soon, Donovan would know he was nearby. Time was running out. A soft rustle behind him made Sullivan spin, weapon drawn. "Easy, Sheriff." Miguel emerged from the shadows, accompanied by 3 men. "We're on your side, remember?" Sullivan lowered his revolver. "I thought we were meeting at the gate." "Change of plans," Miguel gestured to his companions. "These are my shift supervisors, Carlos, Javier, and Diego. They've spread the word. Our men will be ready at 7. Sullivan nodded to the men, noting their grim expressions. "How many?" 35, Miguel replied. "Not all Mexican. Some white workers, 2 men who've seen the sickness in their families." "Armed?" "Pipe wrenches, shovels, a few hunting rifles." Miguel's expression was unapologetic. "We're oil workers, not soldiers. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Sullivan returned to studying the facility. "We need to locate Sarah before everything starts." Mitchell said 2nd floor of the admin building. Miguel pointed to a smaller structure near the rear of the complex. "Maintenance shed. There's an emergency access tunnel from there to the admin building for evacuations during fires." "You're sure?" "I designed the safety protocols myself. The tunnel is only supposed to be used for evacuation out of the building, but—" "It works both ways," Sullivan finished. "Can you get me in?" Miguel nodded. "Carlos has the maintenance keys." Sullivan checked his ammunition one final time. "Once I'm inside, give me 15 minutes to find Sarah. Then start the shift meeting. Get every worker into the main yard. The more confusion, the better." "And if Donovan doesn't release your daughter," Javier asked, his English heavily accented, "then we take control of the refinery, shut down the pumps, threaten to destroy his precious equipment." The men exchanged glances. Miguel spoke for them. "That's sabotage. The company would bring in the Texas Rangers, maybe the National Guard." "Only if we fail," Sullivan said. "If we succeed, the evidence goes public. Donovan goes to prison. Black Ridge faces charges for poisoning the water supply." "A big if," Carlos muttered. "Everything worth fighting for is." Sullivan holstered his weapon. "Let's move." They circled around to the east side of the complex, using the growing darkness for cover. Carlos led them to a service road that approached the rear fence, rarely used unguarded. A pair of bolt cutters made short work of the padlock securing the access gate. Sullivan checked his watch again. 20 minutes until shift change. "Remember," he told Miguel, 15 minutes, then start the meeting. Eddie will be at the main gate with his camera by 7. Get him inside somehow. We need photographic evidence of those chemical drums." Miguel clasped Sullivan's shoulder. "Be careful, Sheriff. Donovan is not a man who loses gracefully." "Neither am I." Sullivan followed Carlos toward the maintenance shed, keeping to the shadows between equipment and storage tanks. The shed stood isolated near the back of the complex, a corrugated metal structure the size of a small barn. Carlos unlocked the side door, revealing a dimly lit interior cluttered with tools, spare parts, and maintenance equipment. "The tunnel entrance is beneath the floor hatch," Carlos whispered, pointing to a metal panel in the corner. "It comes out in the admin building's basement storage room." "How many people know about this tunnel?" "Very few. It was added after the Baytown refinery explosion in '47. Only senior maintenance staff have access." Sullivan nodded. "Get back to Miguel. And thank you." After Carlos left, Sullivan pried open the floor hatch to reveal a narrow metal ladder descending into darkness. He clicked on his flashlight and climbed down. The tunnel was barely 6 feet high, forcing Sullivan to hunch slightly as he moved forward. Pipes and electrical conduits ran along the ceiling, while the concrete floor was damp with condensation. The air felt thick with the smell of oil and mildew. Sullivan estimated he'd traveled about 100 yards when he reached another ladder. Switching off his flashlight, he climbed up and cautiously lifted the hatch at the top, revealing a darkened storeroom filled with filing cabinets and office supplies. He eased himself into the room, closing the hatch silently behind him. A sliver of light showed beneath the door. The hallway beyond was illuminated. Sullivan drew his revolver and approached the door, listening for movement outside. Hearing nothing, he eased the door open a crack. The basement hallway was empty, with stairs at the far end leading up to the main floor. According to Mitchell, Sarah was on the second floor. 2 flights of stairs, and who knew how many guards between Sullivan and his daughter. Keeping his weapon ready, Sullivan moved toward the stairwell. The first floor would likely have staff secretaries, accountants, managers, while the second floor housed executive offices. Donovan would have taken Sarah somewhere private, away from potential witnesses. The stairwell door opened onto a brightly lit hallway. Sullivan heard voices from nearby offices, but the corridor itself was momentarily empty. He quickly crossed to an alcove housing a water fountain, evaluating his options. A wall directory indicated executive offices occupied the entire second floor, with Frank Donovan's suite taking up the eastern wing. That seemed the most likely location for Sarah. Sullivan was about to move toward the next stairwell when the elevator at the far end dinged. He pressed himself deeper into the alcove as Mitchell emerged, accompanied by 2 of Donovan's men. They moved with purpose toward the building's main entrance. "Check the perimeter again," Mitchell was saying. "Sullivan's out there somewhere. Donovan wants him found before the shift change." After they passed, Sullivan slipped into the stairwell and ascended to the second floor. This hallway was carpeted with wood-paneled walls and landscape paintings, a stark contrast to the utilitarian first floor. A secretary's desk sat empty outside a set of double doors marked F. Donovan, President. Sullivan approached cautiously. No sounds came from within the office. The secretary had likely gone home for the day, but Donovan could be inside and Sarah with him. He tried the handle. Locked. Sullivan considered his options. He could search the other offices first, but time was running short. He could try to pick the lock, but that would take too long. Or he could do this the direct way. Using the butt of his revolver, Sullivan smashed the frosted glass window in the door, reached through and unlocked it from the inside. The noise would attract attention, but speed now mattered more than stealth. Donovan's office was a temple to wealth and power. Leather furniture, oriental rugs, oil paintings in gilded frames. A massive mahogany desk dominated the space behind which floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the refinery complex. But no Donovan, and no Sarah. A connecting door led to a conference room with a long table and a dozen high-backed chairs, empty as well. Another door revealed a private bathroom equally vacant. Sullivan felt panic rising. Had Mitchell lied? Was Sarah even in the building? A final door off the conference room was locked. Sullivan pressed his ear against it and heard a muffled sound from within, someone crying. "Sarah," he called softly, then louder. "Sarah, are you in there?" The crying stopped. "Daddy!" The voice was faint but unmistakable. Relief flooded through Sullivan. "Stand back from the door, sweetheart. I'm coming in." The lock was more substantial than the office doors. Sullivan took 3 steps back and kicked with all his strength. The door frame splintered, and the door swung inward to reveal a small private study. Sarah sat on a leather sofa, her wrists bound with rope, a strip of tape across her mouth. Her eyes widened at the sight of him. Sullivan rushed forward, peeling the tape from her mouth as gently as possible and untying her wrists. "Are you hurt?" "No." She wrapped her arms around his neck, sobbing. "I was so scared, Dad." "It's okay," he soothed, holding her tight. "I'm here now. We're getting out." "Not quite yet, Sheriff." Sullivan turned to find Frank Donovan standing in the doorway, a snub-nosed revolver trained on them. Behind him, a man Sullivan didn't recognize blocked the exit. Donovan stepped into the room, his expression almost sorrowful. "You should have taken my offer, Jack. Now, look at the mess we're in." Sullivan pushed Sarah behind him. "Let her go, Frank. She's just a child. A child who's seen too much, as have you." Donovan gestured with his weapon. "Where's the Mexican woman and my property?" "Safe, both of them." Sullivan kept his voice steady, mind racing. His own revolver was holstered beneath his jacket, too slow to draw before Donovan could fire. "Release my daughter, and we can discuss terms." Donovan laughed. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Jack. In fact," he checked his watch, "you're running out of time." "What do you mean?" 7 o'clock, Sheriff. Shift change." Donovan's smile was cold. "I know all about your little plan with the Mexican workers. Mitchell can be quite informative when properly motivated." Sullivan felt his stomach drop. Mitchell hadn't switched sides after all. He'd set them up. "Right now," Donovan continued, "my security team is arresting Miguel Hernandez and his conspirators. By morning, they'll all be in custody or dead, depending on how much they resist." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Donovan moved to the window, gesturing for Sullivan to look. "See for yourself." Sullivan approached cautiously, keeping Sarah behind him. From this vantage point, he could see the main yard of the refinery. Workers were gathering just as planned, but armed guards were positioning themselves around the perimeter. "A trap," Sullivan said quietly. "Indeed. Mitchell has been working for me from the beginning, Jack. Did you really think he'd suddenly grow a conscience?" Donovan shook his head. "Now I'll ask again. Where is Elena Valdez? And where are my documents?" Sullivan met his gaze. "Even if you kill us, the truth will come out. The evidence is already on its way to newspapers across Texas." Something flickered in Donovan's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Then his expression hardened. "You're lying." "Check for yourself. Call the Houston Chronicle, the Dallas Morning News." "Harrison," Donovan barked to the man at the door, "get Reynolds from the Chronicle on the phone, now." As Harrison left to make the call, Donovan's attention wavered momentarily. Sullivan saw his opportunity. "Sarah," he whispered, "when I move, run for the door. Don't stop no matter what." He felt her nod against his back. Donovan was still looking toward the door when Sullivan lunged forward, grabbing the older man's gun hand and forcing it upward. The revolver discharged the bullet, embedding in the ceiling as the two men struggled. "Run, Sarah!" Sullivan shouted. From the corner of his eye, he saw his daughter sprint for the door. Donovan was stronger than he looked, his grip on the revolver vice-like, despite Sullivan's efforts. "You've ruined everything," Donovan hissed, his cultured veneer falling away to reveal the ruthlessness beneath. "Everything I built. You built it on poison and murder." Sullivan grunted, driving his knee into Donovan's stomach. The older man gasped, but didn't release the weapon. They crashed against the desk, sending papers and a crystal decanter flying. Sullivan managed to draw his own revolver, but Donovan grabbed his wrist, slamming it against the edge of the desk until Sullivan's fingers went numb. The weapon clattered to the floor, sliding beneath a bookcase. Sullivan, now unarmed, caught Donovan's gun hand with both of his, desperately keeping the barrel pointed away as they grappled. "All this for a bunch of Mexicans," Donovan spat. "Your brother was the same a bleeding heart who couldn't understand that progress requires sacrifice." "Children dying isn't sacrifice," Sullivan growled. "It's murder." Their struggle carried them across the room, crashing into furniture, neither man able to gain advantage. Sullivan was younger, fitter, but Donovan fought with the desperation of a man who knew he had everything to lose. The revolver discharged again, the bullet shattering a window. Cold evening air rushed in as they staggered toward the opening. "It wasn't personal," Donovan said through gritted teeth. "Not with Robert. Not with you. Just business." "It became personal when you took my daughter." Sullivan drove his forehead into Donovan's nose, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage. Donovan howled, blood streaming down his face, but his grip on the revolver remained firm. They careened toward the broken window glass, crunching beneath their feet. "Let go of the gun, Frank," Sullivan demanded. "It's over. Nothing's over until I say it is." With a sudden surge of strength, Donovan pushed forward, forcing Sullivan against the window frame. Jagged glass tore at Sullivan's jacket as he felt himself tipping backward, the two-story drop yawning behind him. Only his grip on Donovan's gun hand kept him from falling. "You'll die just like your brother," Donovan snarled. "Another tragic accident at Black Ridge." Sullivan's feet scrabbled for purchase on the glass-strewn floor. Through the window he could see the refinery yard below, workers, now surrounded by armed guards. No sign of Sarah. Had she escaped? With a final push, Donovan forced Sullivan halfway out the window. The revolver, still clutched in their combined grip, pressed against Sullivan's chest. "Goodbye, Sheriff," Donovan whispered, his finger tightening on the trigger. A gunshot echoed through the room. Donovan's eyes widened in shock. He looked down to see a crimson stain spreading across his expensive suit jacket. "No," he murmured, releasing his grip on the revolver and staggering backward. "Not like this." Sullivan pulled himself back inside to see Mitchell standing in the doorway, service revolver still aimed at Donovan's chest. "Mitchell!" Sullivan gasped, barely believing his eyes. The deputy's expression was unreadable. "Told you I was tired of being on the wrong side." Donovan slumped against the desk, one hand pressed to his wound. You traitor! Learned from the best, sir." Mitchell kept his weapon trained on Donovan as he approached Sullivan. "You all right?" Sullivan nodded, still processing this unexpected development. "Sarah." "Safe. I've got her in a patrol car." Mitchell's eyes never left Donovan. Your refinery workers are in trouble, though. Donovan's security has them surrounded. Outside, shouts could be heard as the confrontation in the yard escalated. "We need to get down there," Sullivan said, retrieving his revolver from beneath the bookcase. "Before this turns into a bloodbath." "What about him?" Mitchell nodded toward Donovan, who was now slumped on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Sullivan knelt beside his former captor. "Where's the wound?" "Lower chest," Mitchell replied. "Missed the heart. He'll live if he gets medical attention soon." Donovan's breathing was labored, his face ashen. "You're finished, Sullivan. Both of you. My associates in Houston and Austin, they'll bury you." "Not before we bury you first." Sullivan checked the older man's pulse, rapid but strong. "Mitchell, find something to bandage this wound. Then handcuff him to that desk. We'll send a doctor once this is over." As Mitchell tended to Donovan, Sullivan moved to the broken window. In the yard below, tensions were escalating. Guards had drawn weapons, while workers wielded tools and shouted defiance. Miguel stood at the front facing down a guard captain, neither man willing to back down. Sullivan turned back to Mitchell. "Why the change of heart?" The deputy finished securing Donovan to the desk leg with a pair of handcuffs. "Found out last week my sister's kid in Mexico town has been drinking that poisoned water. Leukemia, doctors say." He straightened up. "Some lines you don't cross, even for money." "What about the ambush, the trap for Miguel's workers?" "Half-truth. Donovan's head of security knows something's up, but not the details. I figured you'd need leverage, so I called in a few friends. They're waiting at the main gate, Texas Rangers." Sullivan's eyebrows rose. "Rangers, how'd you manage that?" "Let's just say Donovan's made enemies beyond Dawson." Mitchell handed Sullivan the keys to the handcuffs. "Go help your Mexican friends. I'll stay with Donovan." Sullivan hesitated. "I'm not sure I trust you alone with him." "Fair enough." Mitchell holstered his weapon. "But your daughter's waiting, and those men down there need someone on their side. Someone with a badge." A shout from the yard below made the decision for Sullivan. One of the guards had leveled his shotgun at Miguel. "Don't make me regret this," Sullivan warned, heading for the door. "Already regretting plenty," Mitchell replied, eyes fixed on Donovan. "What's one more?" Sullivan took the stairs 2 at a time, racing through the lobby and out into the yard. The standoff had deteriorated. Further workers on one side, armed guards on the other, with Miguel and the security captain in a heated argument at the center. "That's far enough," Sullivan shouted, badge visible, revolver at his side but not raised. All eyes turned to him. The security captain, a barrel-chested man named Rawlins, looked surprised. "Sheriff Sullivan, what the hell are you doing here? Preventing a massacre." Sullivan moved between the two groups. "Lower your weapons, all of you." "These men are trespassing," Rawlins insisted. "They've refused to leave the premises after shift end." "We're not leaving until the truth is told," Miguel countered. "About the chemicals, about the poisoned water." Sullivan addressed Rawlins. "Your boss, Mr. Donovan, is currently in custody, charged with the murder of Robert Sullivan and the attempted murder of a law enforcement officer, me." A murmur ran through both groups. Rawlins looked skeptical. "Bullshit. Where's your proof?" "Upstairs, bleeding on his imported carpet." Sullivan raised his voice to address everyone. "Texas Rangers are at the main gate. In about 2 minutes, they'll be here with warrants to search this facility for illegal chemicals, specifically MECT-40. Rawlins paled slightly. "There's no such thing on the premises." "Storage tank 7, called one of the workers, "behind the false wall." "Shipping manifests listed as additives," added another, "but the drums have skull markers." Rawlins turned on his men. "Secure the facility. No one enters without my authorization." "Belay that," Sullivan countered. "Any man who interferes with a state investigation will face charges as an accessory." The guards hesitated, looking between Rawlins and Sullivan. "You're making a mistake," Rawlins warned Sullivan. "Donovan has friends in Austin. Powerful friends." "Maybe. But tonight, he's just a man with a bullet hole in his chest." Sullivan holstered his weapon. "Now order your men to stand down, or I'll arrest you for obstruction." For a moment, it seemed Rawlins might resist. Then slowly, he lowered his shotgun. "Stand down," he ordered. "Everyone back to stations." As the guards dispersed, Miguel approached Sullivan. "My sister." "Safe, last I heard, with Dr. Thompson." Sullivan clasped the foreman's shoulder. "You've done something important here tonight, Miguel. Something your people can be proud of." Miguel's expression remained grim. "Pride won't clean our water or heal our children." "No, but this will help." Eddie Reynolds pushed through the crowd camera in-hand notepad, already filled with observations. "I've got the chemical storage location from your men. Care to show me this storage tank 7? Before Miguel could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching drew everyone's attention. 3 black cars with the distinctive star of the Texas Rangers on their doors rolled through the main gate. A tall, weathered man in a Ranger's uniform approached Sullivan. "Sheriff Sullivan, Lieutenant Hayes, Texas Rangers. We received information about illegal chemical dumping and possible corporate homicide." Sullivan nodded. "Your information is correct, Lieutenant. Frank Donovan is in custody upstairs, wounded but stable. He's directly responsible for the murder of my brother Robert Sullivan and for authorizing the use of prohibited chemicals in oil extraction." Hayes surveyed the scene workers still clutching tools, security personnel watching warily from a distance. "Quite a situation you've got here." "Nothing we can't handle now that you're here." Sullivan turned to Miguel. "Show the Rangers and Mr. Reynolds to storage tank 7. I need to check on my daughter." As Miguel led the Rangers toward the chemical storage area, Sullivan made his way to the main gate. A patrol car sat just outside, and through the window he could see Sarah's anxious face. When she spotted him, she flung open the door and ran to him. Sullivan enfolded her in his arms, the relief almost overwhelming. "You okay, kiddo?" She nodded against his chest. "That Deputy Mitchell, he helped me get away. Said you sent him." Sullivan made a mental note to reconsider his opinion of Mitchell. "Let's get you home." "What about the bad men? The ones who took me—" Sullivan smoothed her hair. "They can't hurt anyone anymore." As they walked back to the patrol car, Sullivan glanced over his shoulder at the refinery complex. Rangers and workers moved purposefully between buildings. Eddie Reynolds snapped photographs of chemical drums being removed from a hidden storage area. Mitchell emerged from the administration building escorting a handcuffed and bandaged Frank Donovan toward a Ranger vehicle. A chapter was ending. Justice for Robert. Safety for Sarah. Hope for the people of Mexico Town. But something nagged at Sullivan, a loose end he couldn't quite identify. "Dad?" Sarah tugged at his sleeve. "Can we go see Elena? I want to thank her for helping you find me." "Elena? Of course. She was still at Thompson's cabin waiting for news." "Sure thing, sweetheart. Let's go bring her home." As they drove away from the refinery, Sullivan felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. Yet even as relief flooded through him, that nagging sense of something unfinished persisted. If Mitchell had been helping all along, who had attacked Sullivan in Robert's apartment, who had been following him through town. And more troublingly, if Donovan had enemies powerful enough to interest the Texas Rangers, who exactly were these associates he'd mentioned? Sullivan pushed these thoughts aside as they headed toward Thompson's cabin. Tonight was for reunions and relief. Tomorrow would be soon enough to face whatever came next. But as they drove through the darkness, Sullivan couldn't shake the feeling that Frank Donovan's fall was only the beginning. Dr. Thompson's cabin sat nestled among pine trees 5 miles outside Dawson. Built as a hunting retreat 30 years earlier, its weathered logs and stone chimney offered the kind of seclusion that now seemed providential. Sullivan pulled his patrol car onto the dirt track leading to the cabin headlights illuminating a weathered Ford pickup parked outside Thompson's vehicle. No other cars in sight. A good sign. "Stay in the car until I make sure it's safe," Sullivan told Sarah. "But, Dad?" No arguments. He checked his revolver. "Won't be long." Approaching cautiously, Sullivan noted the cabin windows were dark, except for a faint glow of lamplight visible through the curtains. He climbed the porch steps, listening for movement inside. "Thompson," he called softly, knocking on the door. "It's Sullivan." The door opened slightly, Thompson's wary face appearing in the gap. Relief washed over his features when he recognized Sullivan. "Jack." "Thank God." He opened the door wider. "We've been worried sick. Is Sarah—" "She's fine. In the car." Sullivan stepped inside, scanning the dim interior. "Elena." Thompson's expression tightened. "Gone, Jack." "What do you mean, gone?" "She insisted on leaving. Said she was putting us all in danger by staying." Thompson removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I tried to stop her, but she was determined." Sullivan felt his stomach sink. About an hour ago, she took my hunting rifle and some supplies." "Damn it!" Sullivan paced the small room. "Any idea where she went?" "Said something about finding her brother." Thompson replaced his glasses. "Jack, what happened at the refinery?" Sullivan gave a brief account of the night's events, Donovan's capture, Mitchell's unexpected assistance, the Rangers' intervention. As he spoke, Sarah entered the cabin, ignoring his instructions to wait in the car. "We need to find Elena," she said firmly, her expression so like her mother's that Sullivan felt a pang of recognition. "She helped you when you needed it, Dad. Now she needs us." Sullivan couldn't argue with that logic. "Any chance she left a note, Doc? Something to indicate where exactly she was headed?" Thompson shook his head. "Nothing I found, but she did use my phone before she left. Called someone spoke in Spanish. Miguel, probably." Sullivan checked his watch. Last he'd seen Elena's brother was showing the Rangers the chemical storage area at the refinery. "If she's headed there, she's walking into a hornet's nest. Rangers, guards, workers, half the town must be at Black Ridge by now." "Take my truck," Thompson offered, tossing Sullivan his keys. "I'll stay here with Sarah." Sullivan hesitated, reluctant to let Sarah out of his sight again. "I'll be fine, Dad," she said, reading his thoughts. "You need to find Elena before something happens to her." After a moment's consideration, Sullivan nodded. "Lock the doors behind me. Don't open for anyone but me or Mitchell." The drive back toward town gave Sullivan time to think. With Donovan in custody and the Rangers investigating the chemical dumping, Elena should have been safe. Why flee now unless she knew something they didn't? Something about those associates Donovan had mentioned. Sullivan took a shortcut across rangeland, hoping to intercept Elena if she was traveling on foot toward the refinery. Thompson's truck bounced over the rough terrain, headlights cutting through the darkness. He scanned the landscape, searching for any sign of movement. 20 minutes into his search, Sullivan spotted a figure cresting a low ridge ahead. He killed the engine and lights, grabbing Thompson's binoculars from the glove compartment. Elena moved with purpose, Thompson's rifle slung across her back, a small pack at her side. She was headed not toward the refinery but east, toward the Mexican border. Sullivan started the truck and drove slowly toward her. When she heard the engine, Elena dropped to a crouch rifle, moving to firing position with practiced ease. "Elena!" Sullivan called, stopping the truck and stepping out with his hands raised. "It's me." She lowered the rifle slightly, but her posture remained tense. "Sheriff, how did you find me?" "Thompson told me you'd left. Figured you might be headed for the refinery, but—" Sullivan gestured to the empty landscape around them. "This isn't the way to Black Ridge." "No." Elena's voice was tight. "It's not." "Where are you going?" She hesitated before answering. "Away from Dawson. Away from all of this." Sullivan approached slowly. "Donovan's in custody. The Rangers are investigating the chemical dumping. It's over, Elena. You're safe now." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Safe? You don't understand, Sheriff. It was never just about Donovan. His associates in Houston," Sullivan guessed. "The ones he threatened would come after us." Elena nodded. "Men who make Donovan look like a small-time crook. Oil executives, politicians, judges, all connected, all with blood on their hands. All the more reason to stay and testify. The Rangers need your statement about Robert, about the chemicals." "My statement won't matter if I'm dead." Elena's grip on the rifle tightened. "These men don't leave witnesses, Sheriff." Sullivan took another step closer. "What about Miguel? Your brother's still at the refinery, helping the Rangers." Something flickered across Elena's face. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Miguel can take care of himself. And the children of Mexico Town. The ones drinking poisoned water. Who speaks for them if you leave?" Elena's resolve visibly wavered. "I can't help them if I'm dead. You can't help them if you run either." Sullivan was close enough now to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the strain of the past days etched into her features. "We need you, Elena. I need you." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elena lowered the rifle completely. "You're a difficult man to say no to, Sheriff Sullivan." Sullivan offered a tired smile. "So my daughter tells me." He gestured to the truck. "Come on, let's get back to town." As they drove, Elena explained her fears in greater detail. Donovan was merely a local operator in a much larger network of corruption. His special chemicals came from a manufacturing plant in Houston owned by a conglomerate with connections to state officials and even federal agencies. "Robert discovered the connections," she said. "Followed the money trail from Black Ridge all the way to Austin and beyond. That's why they killed him, not just for exposing the chemicals, but for threatening the entire operation." Sullivan processed this information grimly. "You think these people will try to silence you, even with the Rangers involved?" "Especially with the Rangers involved. The higher this goes, the more dangerous it becomes." They were approaching the outskirts of Dawson when Sullivan spotted headlights in his rearview mirror, a vehicle moving fast, closing the distance rapidly. "Hang on," he warned, pressing the accelerator. Thompson's aging truck protested the sudden demand for speed. The pursuing vehicle, a black sedan similar to those used by Donovan's men, continued gaining ground. Sullivan swerved onto a side road, hoping to lose them in the network of service roads surrounding the oil fields. "They found us," Elena said, checking the rifle's ammunition. "How? Good question." Sullivan negotiated a sharp turn, the truck's tires throwing up dust. "Thompson's the only one who knew I was looking for you, and he didn't know which direction." The sedan was close enough now that Sullivan could see 3 men inside. The passenger window lowered, and the unmistakable shape of a shotgun emerged. "Get down!" Sullivan shouted, as the night erupted with gunfire. Buckshot peppered the rear of the truck, shattering the back window. Sullivan swerved again, taking a hard right onto another dirt road. This one led toward an area of abandoned oil equipment, derricks and pump jacks from earlier drilling operations now superseded by Black Ridge's newer wells. "Can you shoot?" Sullivan asked, ducking as another blast hit the truck. "Since I was 12, Elena replied, rolling down her window. "But I need a clear shot." Sullivan spotted a cluster of old storage tanks ahead. "I'll try to lose them among those tanks. When I break, take your shot." He zigzagged between the rusting metal cylinders, the sedan still in pursuit, but falling slightly behind as the driver negotiated the obstacles. When they reached a clearing on the far side, Sullivan hit the brakes hard. Elena was ready. She leaned out the window and fired a clean shot that blew out the sedan's front tire. The vehicle swerved violently, crashing into one of the storage tanks with a thunderous impact. "Go!" Elena urged, pulling herself back inside. Sullivan floored the accelerator, putting distance between themselves and the crash site. In his mirror, he saw figures emerging from the wrecked sedan, injured but alive, and undoubtedly angry. "That won't hold them for long," Elena said, reloading the rifle. "They'll have backup. We need to get to the sheriff's office. I've got a secure holding cell where you'll be safe until the Rangers can take your statement." "And Sarah?" "Still at Thompson's cabin. Safer there than in town, at least for now." They reached Dawson's main street 15 minutes later. The town appeared unnervingly quiet, most residents likely at home following the evening's dramatic events at the refinery. Sullivan parked behind the sheriff's office and ushered Elena inside through the rear entrance. The office was dark and empty, no deputies, no staff. Sullivan switched on the lights and checked the gun cabinet, retrieving a shotgun and extra ammunition. "Mitchell must still be at the refinery with the Rangers," he explained, loading the shotgun. "Let's get you settled in the holding cell. It's not comfortable, but it's secure." "Sheriff," Elena said quietly, "you should know something about Deputy Mitchell." Sullivan looked up. "What about him? He was there the night Robert was killed." The shotgun shells froze in Sullivan's hands. "What are you saying?" "Robert told me he'd discovered Mitchell was on Donovan's payroll. The night he died, Robert called me, said he was going to confront Mitchell with evidence." Elena's voice tightened. "That was the last time I spoke to him." Sullivan's mind raced, reassembling pieces of the puzzle. Mitchell finding him at Robert's apartment. Mitchell supposedly switching sides at the refinery. Mitchell conveniently disappearing when gunmen pursued Sullivan and Elena. "But Mitchell shot Donovan," Sullivan said. "Saved my life." Perhaps their arrangement ended badly. Or perhaps it's all part of something bigger. Sullivan finished loading the shotgun. "Either way, we need to—" The front door of the sheriff's office swung open. Sullivan raised the shotgun, then lowered it when Eddie Reynolds staggered in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Eddie? What happened?" The newspaper editor collapsed into a chair. "Ambush at the refinery. Someone tipped them off." Sullivan grabbed the first aid kit from his desk. "Tipped who off?" "Men in suits, professionals. They hit just as the Rangers were cataloging the chemical drums." Eddie winced as Sullivan cleaned his head wound. "Shot 2 Rangers, maybe killed 1. Took Donovan." "Jesus." Sullivan exchanged glances with Elena. "What about Miguel and his workers?" "Scattered when the shooting started. Your Deputy Mitchell, he disappeared right before it happened. Left his post guarding Donovan." Elena's expression darkened. "I told you." Sullivan finished bandaging Eddie's wound. "What about Lieutenant Hayes?" "Wounded, not seriously. He sent me to find you. Said to tell you they're regrouping at the county line." Eddie looked at Elena. "You need to get her somewhere safe, Jack. These weren't local thugs. They were something else. Military training, maybe." Sullivan's radio crackled to life on his desk. Sheriff Sullivan, come in. This is Lieutenant Hayes, over. Sullivan grabbed the handset. Sullivan here. What's your situation, Lieutenant? Secure for now. We've established a perimeter 3 miles north of town. 4 men wounded, including myself. 1 critical. Hayes's voice was strained. We need to talk, Sheriff. How fast can you get here? Sullivan considered his options. I have Elena Valdez with me. She's a key witness. Bring her, and whatever evidence you have. We need to move quickly before they regroup. Who exactly are they, Lieutenant? There was a pause before Hayes responded. Not over the radio, Sheriff. Just get here as soon as possible. After signing off, Sullivan turned to Eddie. Can you drive? Well enough. Take my patrol car. Go to Dr. Thompson's cabin outside town. Bring Sarah and Thompson to the ranger perimeter. Tell Hayes they're under my protection. Eddie nodded, accepting the keys. What about you two? We'll take Thompson's truck. Different route, in case someone's watching the roads. Sullivan checked his watch. If we're not at the perimeter in 1 hour, tell Hayes to send a search party. After Eddie left, Sullivan secured the building, checking doors and windows. We'll leave through the back. Stay low. Move fast. Elena gripped the rifle. If Mitchell betrayed us, the entire sheriff's department could be compromised. I know. Sullivan's expression was grim. We can't trust anyone in Dawson right now. They slipped out the back door and into the alley behind the sheriff's office. Thompson's truck was where they'd left it, riddled with buckshot, but still operational. Sullivan started the engine, keeping the headlights off as they navigated the darkened streets. We need to avoid the main roads, he said, turning down a service alley that ran behind Dawson's business district. They'll be watching. A vehicle blocked the alley ahead, another black sedan. Sullivan reversed rapidly, only to find a second vehicle closing in from behind. Trap, he muttered, scanning for escape routes. The alley was narrow buildings on both sides, offering no exit. We'll have to make a run for it. There's a storage yard through that fence. If we can reach it. The crack of a high-powered rifle interrupted him. The truck's front tire exploded, sending them lurching toward the alley wall. Sullivan cut the wheel, fighting for control, but the truck slammed into a dumpster with bone-jarring force. Out! Sullivan shouted, grabbing the shotgun. Now! They scrambled from the wrecked vehicle as men emerged from both sedans. Sullivan recognized the 3 from earlier, now joined by 4 more, all armed, all advancing, with the methodical precision of professionals. Sullivan fired the shotgun, forcing them to take cover. The fence! He yelled to Elena. Go! Elena sprinted toward the chain-link fence separating the alley from a lumber yard beyond. Sullivan provided covering fire, backing toward her position. She reached the fence and began climbing Thompson's rifle slung across her back. Sullivan fired his last shotgun shell and drew his revolver, continuing to retreat. Elena made it over the fence and reached back to help him. He was 3 steps from the fence when the bullet hit him. The impact spun Sullivan around, pain exploding through his left shoulder. He staggered, nearly falling, but kept moving through sheer force of will. Elena's hand found his, helping him climb, despite the searing agony in his shoulder. They tumbled over the fence together as bullets tore through the air around them. Sullivan landed hard, the world swimming before his eyes. Elena dragged him behind a stack of lumber, applying pressure to his bleeding shoulder. How bad? He gasped. Through and through, clean exit wound. Her voice was steady, but fear shadowed her eyes. But you're losing blood fast. Sullivan could hear their pursuers working on the fence, cutting the chain links with wire cutters. You need to go. Find Hayes. Tell him everything. I'm not leaving you. Damn it, Elena, this isn't about me. Sullivan grabbed her arm with his good hand. It's about the truth. About justice for Robert and those kids in Mexico Town. None of that happens if you're captured or killed. She hesitated, torn between loyalty and pragmatism. Please, Sullivan said more softly. For Robert. After a moment's silence, Elena nodded. I'll find Hayes. Bring help. The lumber yard backs up to the railroad tracks. Follow them north. The ranger perimeter should be 3 miles up. Sullivan pressed his revolver into her hand. Take this, 5 rounds left. Elena checked the weapon, then leaned forward and kissed him briefly. Stay alive, Sheriff Sullivan. She disappeared into the darkness of the lumber yard just as their pursuers breached the fence. Sullivan dragged himself deeper into the shadows, leaving a trail of blood he couldn't help. His shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, his vision blurring around the edges. The men spread out flashlight beams, sweeping methodically through the stacked lumber. Sullivan estimated he had perhaps 3 minutes before they found him, not enough time for Elena to reach safety, but maybe enough for her to get beyond their search perimeter. He reached into his pocket with his good hand, finding his badge. The silver star gleamed dully in the faint light. 20 years of service, of believing in the law and justice. Now he was bleeding out in a lumber yard hunted by men who operated above the law. One of the flashlight beams swept near his position. Sullivan remained motionless, conserving his strength. The beam passed, then returned, fixing on his huddled form. Here, a voice called. I found Sullivan. Footsteps approached. Sullivan looked up to see a tall figure looming over him, face shadowed beneath a fedora pistol aimed at Sullivan's chest. Sheriff Sullivan, the man said, his voice cultured, almost regretful. You've led us quite a chase. Who are you? Sullivan demanded, though he suspected he already knew. Someone who cleans up messes like the one your brother created. The man knelt, studying Sullivan's wound. Where's the Valdez woman? Gone. Beyond your reach. The man chuckled. No one's beyond our reach, Sheriff. You should understand that by now. Other men gathered around, their expressions ranging from professional detachment to barely concealed violence. What now, sir? One asked the leader. The tall man considered Sullivan. He's lost a lot of blood. Might not survive transport. I could finish him, another offered, raising his pistol. No. The leader held up a hand. Too many dead lawmen raises questions. We need this to look natural. He turned back to Sullivan. Where are the documents your brother collected, Sheriff? The evidence against Black Ridge. Sullivan managed a weak smile. Everywhere. Newspapers across Texas, FBI offices. Too late to contain it now. Something like respect flickered across the leader's features. Perhaps. But containment takes many forms. He stood. Bring the car around. We're taking the sheriff for a ride. As they lifted Sullivan, agony lanced through his wounded shoulder, driving him to the edge of consciousness. He fought to stay awake, to memorize faces, to find some advantage he could exploit. But darkness was encroaching his strength, ebbing with each drop of blood. His last thought, before unconsciousness claimed him, was of Sarah, his daughter, waiting for a father who might never return. Sullivan woke to the rhythmic sway of a moving vehicle. He lay on the floor of what felt like a car, his hands bound behind him, his wounded shoulder a throbbing mass of pain. Through half-lidded eyes, he could make out the silhouettes of 2 men in the front seats. Should have just killed him, one was saying. Orders, replied the other, the leader from the lumber yard. They want him alive for questioning. About what the brother's dead, the evidence is already out. There are complications. The Rangers finding those drums changes things, and Donovan talked too much during his brief captivity. Sullivan remained still, feigning unconsciousness while gathering his surroundings. The car was traveling fast on what felt like a highway, smooth, with occasional gentle curves. They'd left Dawson behind then, but headed where his shoulder felt oddly numb. Now the pain dulled to a persistent ache. Blood loss, shock, or both. Not good signs. He needed medical attention soon, or Elena's mission to find Hayes would be pointless. Sullivan tested his bonds discreetly. His wrists were secured with what felt like handcuffs, police issue ironically. Too sturdy to break, especially in his weakened state. His ankles were bound with rope tight, but not circulation cutting. "How much farther?" asked the driver. "Another hour to the airfield," replied the leader. "The plane will be waiting." Airfield. Plane. They were taking him out of Texas entirely. Once that happened, Sullivan knew his chances of survival dropped to nearly zero. He scanned the car's interior for anything that might help. His revolver and shotgun were long gone, of course. His badge, too. Nothing within reach except the floor mat beneath him. The car hit a pothole, jostling Sullivan's wounded shoulder. He couldn't suppress a groan of pain. The leader turned. "Ah, Sheriff. Back with us, I see." Sullivan gave up the pretense. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere we can have a more thorough conversation about your brother's activities." The leader's tone was almost conversational. "I must say you've proven remarkably resilient. Most men would have succumbed to blood loss by now." "Sorry to disappoint." A cold laugh. "On the contrary, it means you're strong enough for what comes next." Sullivan met the man's gaze. "Who do you work for?" "People who understand the importance of progress, Sheriff. People who know that America's future depends on oil, on industry, on looking forward rather than backward. People who don't mind poisoning children for profit." The leader waved dismissively. "Collateral damage. Regrettable, but necessary." Donovan said almost the same thing. Sullivan shifted, trying to find a less painful position. "Right before he took a bullet." Frank always lacked subtlety. It's why he became a liability. Understanding dawned. "You're not rescuing Donovan. You're eliminating him." "Let's just say Mr. Donovan's usefulness has reached its end." The leader checked his watch. "As has this conversation." The car slowed, turning onto what felt like a rougher road. Sullivan's mind raced. Whatever chance he had of escape was diminishing with each mile. Through the windshield, he could see only darkness, the car's headlights illuminating an empty country road flanked by scrubland. No signs of civilization, no approaching vehicles, no hope of intervention. Then, in the distance, a pinpoint of light appeared, growing brighter. Another vehicle approaching fast. The driver tensed. "Car coming." "Highway patrol, maybe," the leader said. "Just act normal. We're taking our drunk friend home." The approaching vehicle's high beams suddenly flashed 3 times in rapid succession. "That's not highway patrol," the driver muttered. The leader frowned. "Pull over. Could be our people." The car slowed, moving onto the shoulder. The approaching vehicle, now identifiable as a large truck, pulled alongside its headlights, illuminating the interior of their sedan. Sullivan glimpsed the driver of the truck, a face he recognized instantly. Miguel Hernandez. The night erupted in gunfire as Miguel opened fire with a rifle. The sedan's windshield shattered, the driver slumping forward over the steering wheel. The leader returned fire, but he was exposed, caught in the truck's headlights. Sullivan rolled onto his side, drawing his knees to his chest, then kicked with both bound feet at the rear door. The impact sent fresh pain through his shoulder, but the door held. Outside, the gunfight continued. Sullivan heard shouts in Spanish, then English. More vehicles were arriving. He could see headlights, hear engines. The leader turned towards Sullivan, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "You won't win this, Sheriff. The machinery is already in motion." He raised his pistol, aiming at Sullivan's head. A shot rang out. The leader's expression froze in surprise, a red stain blossoming on his chest. He toppled sideways, pistol falling from his fingers. The rear door wrenched open. Miguel stood there, rifle in hand, expression grim. "Sheriff Sullivan," he said, "you look terrible." Sullivan managed a weak smile. "Never been happier to see anyone in my life." As Miguel cut his bonds, Sullivan saw other vehicles surrounding the sedan pickup trucks filled with men from Mexico Town, all armed, and beyond them, the unmistakable silhouettes of Texas Ranger cruisers. "Elena," Sullivan asked, as Miguel helped him from the car. "Safe, with the Rangers." Miguel supported Sullivan's weight easily. "She found Lieutenant Hayes, told him everything. Then she insisted we come find you." Sullivan nodded weakly, the world beginning to spin around him. "My daughter, also safe. The doctor is treating her for shock, but she is unharmed." Relief washed over Sullivan like a wave carrying away the last of his strength. As darkness claimed him once more, he heard Miguel shouting for a medic, felt himself being lifted onto a stretcher. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Elena's face, tear-streaked, but determined, leaning over him. "Stay with us, Sheriff," she whispered. "The fight isn't over yet." Sullivan drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of reality interspersed with fever dreams. Sometimes he was back in Normandy, pinned down on the beach, with bullets tearing through the air around him. Other times he was in Korea, carrying a wounded comrade through snow-covered mountains. Then he would catch glimpses of the present sterile hospital walls, doctors in white coats, Elena's worried face, Sarah's tears. When he finally woke fully, sunlight was streaming through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across a hospital room. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged, an IV drip connected to his right arm. The clock on the wall read 10:15, though whether morning or evening he couldn't tell. "Dad?" Sarah's voice tentative but hopeful. Sullivan turned his head to find his daughter sitting in a chair beside the bed, a book open in her lap. Her face lit up when she saw he was awake. "Hey, kiddo." His voice was a raspy whisper, his throat dry as sandpaper. Sarah scrambled to pour him water from a pitcher on the bedside table. "The doctor said you'd wake up today. You've been asleep for almost 3 days." Sullivan sipped the water gratefully. 3 days? You lost a lot of blood." Sarah's expression turned serious beyond her years. "They had to operate twice. The bullet damaged an artery." Sullivan tried to sit up, but pain lanced through his shoulder. "Where are we? This isn't Dawson County Hospital. Austin, the Rangers brought you here on a special plane." Sarah took his hand. "They said it wasn't safe in Dawson anymore." Austin, the state capital, far from Donovan's territory but potentially deeper into his associate's domain. "Where's Elena?" "With Lieutenant Hayes. They've been talking to important people, judges and FBI agents, and men in fancy suits." Sarah squeezed his hand. "She visits every day, brings me books, and tells me stories about Uncle Robert." Sullivan felt a surge of gratitude toward Elena, followed by concern. If she was testifying, she was exposing herself to tremendous risk. "And Miguel? He comes too with his wife. They brought homemade tamales yesterday. Sarah smiled. I like them. A nurse entered, her expression brightening when she saw Sullivan was awake. Well, look who's rejoined the land of the living. I'll let Dr. Winters know right away. After she left, Sullivan turned back to Sarah. What about Thompson Eddy? Dr. Thompson is here in Austin too. He's helping with the investigation. Sarah's brow furrowed. Mr. Reynolds went back to Dawson to run the newspaper. He calls every day to check on you. Sullivan nodded, piecing together the situation. The Rangers had evacuated key witnesses to Austin, establishing a protective bubble around them while building a case. Anyone else I should know about? Sarah hesitated. Deputy Mitchell came once. He talked to the Rangers for a long time, then left. Sullivan's jaw tightened. Despite Mitchell's last-minute assistance at the refinery, his role in Robert's death remained unresolved. If he was cooperating with the Rangers now, it was likely to save his own skin. The door opened again, admitting Dr. Winters, a tall, austere man in his 60s, with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes. Sheriff Sullivan, good to see you conscious. His tone was professional but warm. You've had quite an ordeal. So I hear. Sullivan submitted to the doctor's examination, wincing as Winters tested the mobility of his injured shoulder. The bullet missed the bone but nicked the subclavian artery. You're lucky to be alive. Winters checked the surgical dressing. Another few minutes without treatment, you would have bled out. When can I get out of here? Winters raised an eyebrow. Eager to leave, Sheriff, most men who've been shot and nearly died might appreciate the rest. Most men aren't in the middle of exposing a statewide conspiracy. Ah, yes, the famous Black Ridge case. Winters made a notation on Sullivan's chart. Lieutenant Hayes mentioned you'd be anxious to rejoin the investigation. Medically, I'd recommend at least another week of hospital care followed by significant rehabilitation. And realistically, Winters sighed, I can discharge you in 48 hours if you promise to take it easy and maintain regular checkups. The wound needs monitoring for infection, and you'll require physical therapy to regain full use of that arm. Sullivan nodded. Thank you, Doctor. After Winters departed, Sarah moved closer to the bed. Dad, there's something else you should know. Something in her tone made Sullivan tense. What is it? I overheard Lieutenant Hayes talking to Elena yesterday. They found Uncle Robert's body. Sullivan went very still. What? They exhumed him. Did an autopsy. Sarah's voice quavered. Elena was right. He didn't kill himself. The bullet came from a different angle than they first thought. Despite having suspected this all along, hearing it confirmed hit Sullivan hard. His brother murdered, then framed for suicide. The wound in his shoulder seemed insignificant compared to the pain that knowledge brought. Does your mom know? He asked, referring to his estranged sister-in-law who had moved to Dallas after Robert's death. Sarah nodded. Lieutenant Hayes called her. She's coming tomorrow. Sullivan closed his eyes briefly, gathering his strength. When he opened them, he found Sarah watching him with concern. I'm okay, kiddo. He managed a reassuring smile. Just processing. Are the bad men going to pay for what they did to Uncle Robert? Yes. Sullivan's voice hardened. Every last one of them. True to his word, Dr. Winters discharged Sullivan 2 days later. His left arm was in a sling, his movements limited and painful, but he was mobile and determined. Lieutenant Hayes met him in the hospital lobby, a lean, weathered man with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. His handshake was firm, his gaze evaluating. Sheriff Sullivan, good to see you up and about. Lieutenant, thanks for the rescue. Hayes nodded. Thank Miss Valdez and Hernandez. They were most insistent we find you before Hollister's men got you across state lines. Hollister, James Hollister, the man who nearly put a bullet in your head. Hayes led Sullivan toward the exit. Former military intelligence, now private security for Gulf Standard Oil, the parent company that owns Black Ridge. Sullivan absorbed this information. And Donovan, dead. Found floating in Lake Travis yesterday with 2 bullet holes in his chest. Silencing a potential witness. Exactly. Hayes held the door for Sullivan. Gulf Standard is cleaning house, removing anyone who might connect them to the MECT-40 scandal. Outside, the bright Texas sun made Sullivan squint. A black Ford waited at the curb, a ranger deputy at the wheel. Hayes opened the rear door, revealing Elena seated inside. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then Elena smiled a tentative expression that transformed her face. "Sheriff Sullivan, it's good to see you recovering." Sullivan slid into the seat beside her. "Thanks to you, from what I hear." "I only did what Robert would have expected." She looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "What you would have done for me." As the car pulled away from the hospital, Adiz explained the current situation. The Texas Rangers had established a secure location in a government building downtown where key witnesses were being debriefed. The FBI had joined the investigation, focusing on interstate aspects of the conspiracy. Reporters from major newspapers were circling, sensing a story that could dwarf the Teapot Dome scandal of decades past. "We've connected MECT-40 to cancer clusters in 3 counties, Hayes said. "Not just Mexico Town, but anywhere near wells where the chemical was used. Gulf Standard has already begun damage control, denying knowledge, claiming Donovan acted independently. And the men who attacked the refinery, who shot me, ghosts. No identification, no records. Professional cleaners brought in to eliminate evidence and witnesses." Sullivan's gaze met Elena's. "But they failed." "This time," she said softly. "They're still out there, Sheriff." The car turned into an underground garage beneath a nondescript government building. Armed rangers stood guard at security checkpoints, checking identification before allowing them through. "Welcome to our temporary headquarters," Hayes said as they exited the vehicle. "Secured perimeter, controlled access, round-the-clock protection. Safe as houses." Sullivan wasn't convinced. Men like Hollister specialized in penetrating secure locations, but he kept his concerns to himself as they entered an elevator. The operations center occupied the entire 5th floor, a maze of offices and conference rooms buzzing with activity. Rangers and FBI agents compared notes, examined evidence, and constructed elaborate charts connecting individuals and corporations. Hayes led them to a large conference room where Miguel Thompson and Sarah waited. Sullivan embraced his daughter, carefully mindful of his injured shoulder, then shook hands with the others. "Quite an operation you've got going," he said to Hayes. "Largest joint investigation in Ranger history," Hayes confirmed. "Gulf Standard has tentacles throughout the state government. We're finding connections to judges, legislators, even the governor's office. And Mitchell." Hayes's expression tightened. "Cooperating, in protective custody at a separate location. His testimony will be crucial. He witnessed Robert's murder, though he claims he wasn't the shooter." "Do you believe him?" "We're verifying his account." Hayes gestured to the evidence board. "What matters is building an airtight case against the real power players. Donovan, Mitchell, they're small fish." Sullivan studied the board. Photographs, documents, and strings connected individuals in a complex web of corruption. At the center was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, silver-haired, patrician features, impeccably dressed. "Who's that?" "Walter Chandler," Elena answered. "CEO of Gulf Standard Oil. Robert believed he personally authorized the use of MECT-40 despite knowing its dangers. Chandler's untouchable, Hayes added. Former Undersecretary of Commerce, friends with senators, rumored to be on a first-name basis with the president. Sullivan stared at the photograph, memorizing Chandler's face. Everyone's touchable if you have the right leverage. Hayes checked his watch. Speaking of which, we have a meeting with the U.S. Attorney in 20 minutes. They're considering RICO charges against Gulf Standard's entire executive board. I want to be there. Wouldn't have it any other way, Sheriff. Hayes handed Sullivan a folder. You might want to review these documents first. Statements from Mitchell about Robert's murder. As the others prepared for the meeting, Sullivan opened the folder and began reading. Mitchell's account was detailed and self-serving, placing most of the blame on Donovan while minimizing his own involvement. According to Mitchell, he had been present when Donovan confronted Robert, but hadn't known murder was planned. When Robert refused to surrender his evidence, Donovan had shot him, then ordered Mitchell to help stage it as a suicide. Sullivan closed the folder disgusted. Mitchell was lying, or at least omitting crucial details, but proving it would be difficult, especially with Donovan dead and unable to contradict the account. Troubled Sheriff, Elena had approached silently, her expression concerned. Mitchell's statement. It's too neat, too convenient. She nodded. I thought the same, but without evidence to the contrary, there must be something. Robert was meticulous. If he suspected Mitchell was working for Donovan, he would have documented it. Most of Robert's personal effects were seized after his death. Anything incriminating would have been destroyed. Sullivan frowned, thinking. Maybe not everything. Robert had a safe deposit box at First National in Dallas, our mother's jewelry family documents. I was the co-signer, but I never checked it after he died. Didn't see the point. Elena's eyes widened. Could he have hidden evidence there? It's possible. Robert was always thinking 3 steps ahead. We should tell Hayes. Sullivan shook his head. Not yet. Mitchell has contacts throughout law enforcement. If he gets wind that we're looking for evidence against him specifically, you think he might run, or worse. I think a cornered rat is dangerous. Sullivan lowered his voice further. I need to get to Dallas. Today. Elena studied him. You're in no condition to travel alone. I know. That's why I'm asking for your help. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, decisively, she nodded. What's your plan? The First National Bank of Dallas occupied a stately building downtown, its marble columns and brass fixtures speaking of stability and tradition. Sullivan, dressed in a borrowed suit with his arm still in a sling, approached the manager's desk with Elena at his side. They had left Austin 3 hours earlier, telling Hayes they needed to meet Robert's widow to discuss funeral arrangements. Not a complete lie, they did intend to see Catherine Sullivan after visiting the bank, but an omission that could cost them Hayes's trust, if discovered. Sheriff Sullivan, the bank manager greeted him, rising from his desk. We received your call. My condolences about your brother. Thank you, Mr. Parsons. This is Miss Valdez, a family friend. Parsons led them to the vault area, checking Sullivan's identification before retrieving the necessary paperwork. I understand you wish to access Robert Sullivan's safe deposit box. That's right. I'm the co-signer. Of course. Right this way. The vault was cool and quiet. Rows of metal boxes nestled in the walls like honeycomb. Parsons located box 437, inserted his key, then stepped aside to allow Sullivan to use the customer key he'd brought from Austin. I'll leave you to your privacy, Parsons said. Just ring when you're finished. After he departed, Sullivan opened the box with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside were exactly what he expected: his mother's pearl necklace, his father's pocket watch, family photographs, legal documents, and something unexpected, a small leather notebook identical to the one Sullivan had found in Robert's apartment. "This is it," Sullivan said, flipping through the pages. "Robert's second journal. Like the first, it contained notes, dates, and observations, but these focused specifically on Mitchell. Entries detailed meetings between Mitchell and Donovan, payments conversations Robert had overheard. "Listen to this," Sullivan read aloud. "April 17th. Mitchell met D. at the Oasis Motel outside town. Delivered copies of Sheriff's Department patrol schedules. Received envelope of cash. Discussed problem in Mexico town. Miguel Hernandez organizing workers to demand water testing." Elena took the journal, scanning further entries. "Here, May 3rd. Mitchell warned me to drop the investigation, said people would get hurt if I continued. Not subtle about the threat." Sullivan turned to the final pages, where a single entry dated the day before Robert's death stood out. "Meeting M tonight with evidence. Offering one chance to come clean before I take everything to Jack. Left backup materials in Dallas, with letters explaining everything in case something happens to me." "Letters?" Elena looked up. "What letters?" Sullivan searched the box again, finding an envelope addressed to him in Robert's handwriting. Inside were several pages of neat script, along with photographs showing Mitchell meeting with Donovan at various locations. "Robert documented everything," Sullivan said quietly, "right up to the end." The letter was heartbreaking, Robert's final message to his brother, explaining his investigation, his suspicions, his fears. In it, he directly accused Mitchell of being not just Donovan's informant, but his enforcer responsible for intimidating Mexican workers and possibly for violence against those who complained about the water. Most damningly, Robert described overhearing a conversation between Mitchell and Donovan discussing the need to permanently solve the Hernandez problem, suggesting Mitchell had been involved in planning Miguel's murder before Robert intervened. Sullivan's hands shook as he finished reading. Mitchell didn't just witness Robert's murder. According to this, he was sent specifically to kill Robert that night. Elena's expression hardened. "We need to get this to Hayes immediately." Agreed. Sullivan returned everything to the box except the journal and letter which he secured inside his jacket. "Let's go." They were halfway back to Austin when Sullivan noticed the black sedan following them. It had maintained a consistent distance for the past 20 miles, always visible in the rearview mirror despite Sullivan's attempts to vary their speed. "We've got company," he said quietly to Elena, who was driving due to his injured shoulder. She checked the mirror. "How long?" "Since Dallas, I think. They're good staying just far enough back to avoid suspicion." Elena's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Gulf Standard. Or Mitchell. He would know we went to Dallas. Might have guessed why." Sullivan checked the revolver Hayes had provided him, confirming it was fully loaded. With his injured shoulder, his shooting would be compromised, but better than nothing. "What do we do?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the danger. Sullivan considered their options. They were on an open highway miles from the nearest town. No rangers or FBI agents to call for backup. Just the two of them against unknown pursuers. "We need to reach a populated area. Next town is Georgetown, about 15 miles ahead." Elena nodded, pressing the accelerator. The borrowed Ranger vehicle, a sturdy Ford with a powerful engine, responded immediately, picking up speed. In the rearview mirror, Sullivan saw the sedan accelerate as well, closing the distance. Any pretense of casual following was abandoned. "They know we've spotted them," Sullivan said grimly. The sedan was gaining rapidly now, its front end growing larger in the mirror. Sullivan caught a glimpse of the driver and passenger men in dark suits, expressionless. "Elena, when I say now, I want you to hit the brakes hard, then swerve right onto that access road." He pointed to an approaching turnoff. That will bring them right on top of us. Exactly. They'll overshoot, have to turn around. Buys us time. Elena nodded hands at the 10 and 2 position, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The sedan was less than 50 yards behind, now still gaining. Ready, Sullivan said, gripping the dashboard with his good hand. Now! Elena stomped the brake pedal. The Ford's tires screeched in protest as the car decelerated violently. Behind them, the sedan's driver reacted too late, shooting past, as Elena executed a hard right turn onto the access road. Through the rear window, Sullivan saw the sedan braking desperately, then attempting a U-turn on the highway, a maneuver made difficult by its speed and the narrow median. It worked, Elena exulted, accelerating down the access road. For now, they'll recover quickly. Sullivan scanned their surroundings. The access road paralleled the highway for a stretch, then curved away toward what appeared to be a small industrial area. Head for those buildings. Might find help there. The industrial site turned out to be a cotton processing facility, largely automated, but with a few workers visible. Elena pulled up to the main building, tires spraying gravel. Stay in the car, Sullivan ordered, climbing out with his revolver ready. If they show up before I get back, don't wait. Just drive. Inside the facility, Sullivan found a startled foreman, who, upon seeing Sullivan's badge, agreed to call the local sheriff's department. While waiting, Sullivan positioned himself at a window overlooking the entrance, watching for the sedan. It appeared 5 minutes later, moving slowly, its occupants scanning the facility. Sullivan counted 4 men. Now the driver and passenger had been joined by 2 more, all armed, all with the unmistakable bearing of professionals. The foreman returned. Sheriff's department says they can have deputies here in 15 minutes. Who are these men exactly? Killers, Sullivan replied simply. Is there another exit from this building? Preferably one not visible from the front. Loading dock in back. Goes out to the cotton fields. Sullivan nodded. I need you to evacuate your workers. Get everyone out through that loading dock, away from the building. As the foreman hurried to comply, Sullivan returned to Elena, explaining the situation in terse sentences. We need to hold out 15 minutes until local law enforcement arrives. Elena checked her own pistol, a .32 caliber she'd been provided in Austin. The journal and letter, safe. Sullivan had secured the documents inside his shirt against his chest. But if something happens to me, you need to know Mitchell was sent to kill Robert that night. The letter proves it. Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. That's why he helped us at the refinery. Not conscience, but self-preservation. If Donovan was arrested, Mitchell needed to position himself as an ally to law enforcement. Exactly. He played both sides, making himself valuable to whoever came out on top. Outside, the 4 men had spread out surrounding the building. Sullivan watched them coordinate with hand signals, moving with military precision. These aren't ordinary gunmen, he observed. They're trained operatives. Hollister's men, most likely, Gulf Standard's cleanup crew. The first shots shattered windows on the east side of the building. Workers who hadn't yet evacuated screamed and ran for cover. They're not waiting, Sullivan said grimly. Let's move to the loading dock. They navigated through the machinery of the processing plant, staying low as more shots rang out. The loading dock was deserted, its large doors open to the cotton fields beyond. A few trucks sat in the loading area, providing potential cover. Sullivan positioned Elena behind a forklift, then took cover behind a stack of cotton bales. When the sheriff's deputies arrive, they'll approach from the main road. These men will be caught between us. If we survive that long, Elena said, her expression tense but determined. We'll survive. Sullivan checked his watch. 10 more minutes. The loading dock doors burst open, two gunmen entering with weapons raised. Sullivan fired twice, forcing them back outside. Elena added her own shots, creating a crossfire that kept the attackers at bay. "Save your ammunition," Sullivan advised. "Make every shot count." For several minutes, they maintained a standoff, the gunmen probing with occasional shots, Sullivan and Elena responding minimally, conserving bullets. But Sullivan knew it was only a matter of time before the attackers coordinated a rush from multiple directions. His shoulder throbbed with each movement, the wound threatening to reopen under the strain. He'd taken painkillers that morning, but their effect was wearing off, leaving him increasingly aware of his vulnerability. "Sullivan," a voice called from outside, "we know you have Sullivan's journal. Hand it over and you both walk away." "Hollister," Sullivan called back, a humorless laugh. "Hollister's in Houston. I'm just the messenger. Tell your boss, if anything happens to us, copies of everything go public. Rangers, FBI newspapers, everyone gets the full story." "A bluff. You haven't had time to make copies." "Want to bet your life on that." Silence followed, suggesting the gunmen were reassessing. Sullivan used the opportunity to signal Elena to move closer to the loading dock exit. "When I create a distraction," he whispered, "run for the cotton field. Stay low in the furrows. Head east toward the highway." "I'm not leaving you," she hissed back. "One of us needs to get that evidence to Hayes." Before she could protest further, the attack resumed, more coordinated this time, with gunfire from multiple angles. A bullet struck uncomfortably close to Sullivan's position, sending splinters flying. "Running out of time," he muttered, and ammunition, he had only 3 rounds left. Then, in the distance, he heard it, the wail of approaching sirens. The local sheriff's department arriving at last. The gunmen heard it too. Their fire intensified, becoming less strategic and more desperate. They needed to finish this before law enforcement arrived. Sullivan saw his opportunity. "When I move, you run," he told Elena. "That's an order." Before she could object, Sullivan emerged from cover, firing rapidly at the loading dock entrance. His shots went wide, but achieved their purpose, drawing all attention to his position. "Now!" he shouted to Elena. She hesitated for only a moment before sprinting toward the exit, staying low. Sullivan continued firing, his final round spent, as Elena disappeared into the cotton field. The gunmen, realizing what had happened, shifted their focus to the fleeing figure. Sullivan grabbed a metal pipe from nearby machinery and hurled it through a window on the opposite side of the building, creating a diversion. It worked partially. 2 gunmen turned toward the noise while the others continued pursuing Elena. Sullivan, now weaponless and increasingly lightheaded from exertion, could only watch as she zigzagged through the cotton rows, shots kicking up dirt around her feet. Then, salvation. Sheriff's Department vehicles swarmed into the facility from the main entrance, deputies deploying with shotguns and rifles. The gunmen, realizing they were outnumbered and outgunned, began a fighting retreat toward their sedan. Sullivan slumped against a cotton bale, the adrenaline that had sustained him ebbing away. In the field, Elena had reached the perimeter fence, scrambling over it to safety, as local deputies established a defensive position around her. It was over. The evidence was secure. Mitchell's role in Robert's murder would be exposed. As medical personnel attended to him, Sullivan felt a profound sense of completion. Robert could rest in peace. Now his killer identified his work, vindicated. The children of Mexico Town would have clean water again. Elena and Miguel could live without fear. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. 2 months later, Sullivan stood at the cemetery in Dawson, a cool autumn breeze rustling the flowers on Robert's grave. The town had changed in his absence. Gulf. Standard had abandoned its local operations. The refinery stood idle, and a federal cleanup operation was addressing the contaminated wells. His shoulder was healing well, though Dr. Winters warned he might never regain full mobility in his left arm. A small price to pay, Sullivan thought, for the justice they'd secured. Mitchell had been arrested, charged with Robert's murder, based on the evidence in the journal and letter. Facing the death penalty, he'd turned state's evidence against Gulf Standard's executives. Walter Chandler had resigned in disgrace, his company facing billions in damages from lawsuits filed by affected communities. Most importantly, the people of Mexico Town had received official recognition of the harm done to them. Federal funds were allocated for medical treatment of affected families, and new water systems were being installed. "I thought I'd find you here," Elena's voice came from behind him. Sullivan turned, smiling. She looked different now, more confident, her clothing reflecting her new position as community liaison for the federal relief program. "Just saying goodbye," Sullivan explained. "Sarah and I leave for Dallas tomorrow." Elena nodded. "Catherine offered you a place in her law firm. Legal investigator, less dangerous than sheriff work, better hours for raising Sarah." He gestured to his injured shoulder. "And more suitable for a man with damaged wing." "You'll be missed here." Sullivan looked around at the town visible beyond the cemetery gates. "Some will miss me. Others won't. Miguel asked me to give you this." Elena handed him an envelope. "An invitation to the community center opening next month. They're naming it after Robert." Sullivan tucked the envelope in his pocket. "I'll be there." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the autumn sun warming their faces despite the cool breeze. "What about you?" Sullivan finally asked. "Will you stay in Dawson?" "For now, our people need advocates as the cleanup continues." She met his gaze directly. "But Dallas isn't so far away." Sullivan felt a familiar warmth that had nothing to do with the sunshine. Since the confrontation at the cotton processing plant, their relationship had evolved tentative at first, then increasingly comfortable. Neither had put a name to it yet, but both recognized its potential. "No," he agreed. "Not far at all." They walked together toward the cemetery gates, leaving Robert's grave behind, but carrying his legacy forward. The last of the oil wells would soon be capped, the land reclaimed, the water purified. Some battles were worth fighting. Sullivan reflected, no matter the cost. Some truths needed to be told, some wrongs righted. Robert had understood that. Now Sullivan did too. As they reached his car, Sullivan gazed once more at the horizon where the derricks of Black Ridge, once symbols of prosperity, then corruption, stood silent against the Texas sky. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked. "That oil runs out," Sullivan replied. "But the truth endures." She slipped her hand into his. Robert would agree. "Yes," Sullivan said, giving her fingers a gentle squeeze. "I believe he would." The end.